Chapter 1290. After all, the previous system notification said, if you can absorb more elemental divinity, the power of the divine sword will be greatly increased. Now, it was strongly recommended to come back after leveling up. There was only one explanation: injecting it after leveling up would be more beneficial to Duque. If Duque was still in a slightly confused state before, now Duque had completely understood that the time to break through to demigod had come. As long as he finished up the work in Naxxramas, with Atish, Duque was now a genuine guardian of Azeroth. If there was anything different between him and the previous guardians, it was that he lacked the demigod magic that was infused by all the members of the Tirisful Council. That wasn't important. As long as he broke through to demigod, everything would be solved. Duke lifted Atish gently and immediately felt that his arcane magic circuit had increased by more than 200%. The surging magic power reverberated in the huge circuit formed by the connection between himself and the divine artifact staff. If Duke, who was a third-class Breaking Dawn, was able to produce large rivers and lakes of mana every second, he would feel like he was in the middle of an ocean right now. Duque turned to face the soul of the ice dragon and said loudly, "Sapphiron, I ask you, are you willing to be under my command and become my exclusive elemental emissary? Fight to protect the world of Azeroth, wash away your sins, and achieve the ultimate goal of returning your soul to the Temple of Dragon Sleep." There was nothing to think about. Sapphiron, who was in soul form, lowered his proud head. "I am willing." Duque didn't say anything else. He raised his staff high, and a beam of blue light shot towards Sapphiron's huge soul. Like silk being spun from a cocoon, everyone vaguely saw countless black threads being drawn out of Sapphiron's soul and dissipating in the air. Then the frost aura in the entire hall began to gather on Sapphiron's spiritual body. A series of sizzling sounds rang out. Under Duque's extraordinary magic power, not only Sapphiron, but even the hall they were in felt like it was being frozen. It was just that one was coming out, and the other was coming in. As the entire space began to become illusory, Sapphiron's soul began to materialize. The ugly white bones were covered by muscles formed by the condensation of elements. Then, a dragon's skin as white as snow appeared out of thin air. 10 seconds later, there was one less fallen bone dragon in the world, and one more elemental dragon that was transformed from the purest frost element. From this moment on, Sapphiron became an elemental creature similar to the fire phoenix. After dealing with Sapphiron, it was time to split the loot. The Alliance heroes quickly and simply picked out the epic equipment that they wanted. Of course, Naxxramas' equipment was only at level 80. The rest of the equipment was equivalent to level 60 in the game, so the 15 of them were not interested in it. They would probably leave it for William and the rest. On this day, in the Cenarian fortress in the north of Silithus, the battle was still at a stalemate. Although the allied forces had gathered the elites of the Alliance, the Horde, and the Dragon race, they were still unable to push the battle to the wall of beetles in the middle of Silithus, let alone the Temple of Ankh-Kiraj. Grom Hellhowl, who was covered in mud, was covered in green and yellow. These were the body fluids of the insects. After solidifying, not only did they emit a foul smell, but they also looked very funny. Lord Howl, who had retreated to the fortress, could not help but complain to Thrall, "Great Chief, how long are we going to defend? If we really can't, we can form an assault team and destroy some damned insect nest first." Thrall did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "How many elites do you think the Horde will sacrifice to achieve this goal?" Lord Howl was stunned. His expression was one of unwillingness at first, but then it turned gloomy. Although the Horde had brought tens of thousands of people this time, they did not even need to compare it with the thousands of elites who had attacked Blackrock Mountain. Just by looking at the old and the young, one could tell that this Horde army was just for show. It was now the 7th year of the westward expedition. It was far from enough for the new generation of orcs to grow up. Those 5 or 6-year-old children would need at least 10 more years before they could barely fight. There were only 100,000 orcs in the westward expedition. After the conflict with the Night Elves in Grey Valley, the Burning Legion's invasion of Mount Hyjal, and the latest battle with the beetles, it could be said that almost all the orcs who could fight were here. Without the support of the Tauren, trolls, and goblins, the horde would not even be able to gather 100,000 troops. The Tauren had never been a race with a large population. To be able to bring out 5,000 soldiers was already the result of Kane's full support. Wujin's Darkspear clan was also a branch of the trolls. 10,000 soldiers was the limit. If this army was all lost here, then the horde did not need to say anything. If the alliance turned against them, they would have to destroy themselves here. This time, the horde's territory was the most directly affected by the swarm of insects. If the alliance was ruthless enough, they could wait until the horde's warriors were all killed, and then come to pick up the spoils. The alliance was also suffering from internal and external problems. For them to be able to bring out so many troops so quickly, everyone in the horde with a bit of brains felt that the alliance was very generous. Although the situation was not good, the stupid insects would not learn to intercept the alliance's supply railway. With the continuous flow of firearms, the battle loss ratio was still very eye-catching. Often, the death of 100 giant insects taller than the orcs was the sacrifice of one alliance or horde warrior. In a situation where the alliance's priests were so powerful, as long as they were not beheaded on the spot and dragged to the rear, even if they were still breathing, they could be saved. Therefore, when Duque made it clear that they would wait until they dealt with Naxxramas or Zul-Ghurub before taking further action, Sal and Wujin raised their limbs and voted in favor. Not many people would die, and it would allow the young orc warriors to gain valuable combat experience. This kind of good thing did not happen every day. Other than the worry that after the alliance and the horde joined forces, it would increase the possibility of the horde being annexed, there was nothing bad about it. Just as Grom was about to leave, Sal and the others suddenly heard a shrill cry, "Warning, there are army-level insects." Army-level insects were super-large insects that could only be killed by an entire army. Thrall and Grom turned their heads and saw the mountain-like beetle in the distance. Again. Damn it. There are more and more of these things recently. Grom spat fiercely, then picked up his blood howl and turned to leave. Wait. Let's go together. Army-level insects also meant the terrible vitality of the insects. Although the attack power of that thing was not too terrible, the giant beetle was basically immune to existing artillery fire. If it was allowed to rush to the edge of the fortress, it would undoubtedly greatly affect the line of defense. Once the line of defense collapsed, it would be filled with human lives. In the absence of the main force of the alliance, the lives of the horde warriors would naturally be filled. At this moment, there was a sudden roar of cannons from the clouds. Obviously, it was a terrifying cannon that far exceeded all the cannons in the Cenarian fortress. One shot overturned the army-level giant insects. There was Duque's laughter in the air. "Yo! Looks like we made it." Chapter 1291. Giant ships, cannons, countless men's dreams. Sal and the tribal warriors looked up at the sky. At first, they thought it was another flying ship like the Skybreaker. Obviously, they were wrong. It was flying, yes, but it was not a giant ship, but a huge fortress. No one would forget the terrible figure that once wreaked havoc in the main cities of the major races. In the eyes of many ignorant tribal people, it was almost a scourge. It was boundless, floating in the sky, and there was no way to fight it. Every person could only hide in the main city with the strongest defense, trembling, listening to the terrible wail of death lingering in the sky, waiting for the judgment of extinction to come. Cannons couldn't hit, magic couldn't reach, and the two-footed flying dragons that were sent out would only be brutally wiped out by gargoyles more than 10 times their number. Every tribal warrior still clearly remembered the humiliating days when they could only be beaten in pain and unable to fight back. Now, what was this? Directly south of Cenarian Fortress, Naxxramas slowly descended from the sky. It swooped down violently, sweeping away large swathes of clouds, and stood between the allied forces and the swarm of insects in an extremely domineering manner. It easily blocked the insects flying from the south. Above Naxxramas in the sky, there was still the terrible giant skull relief. But the shape was a bit like a roly-poly doll, with a square bottom and a conical top composed of 4 edges. The four corners of the fortress fluttered in the wind with the Alliance's blue background and golden border lion flags. Even though Naxxramas looked much more dilapidated than before, there was a very obvious big hole facing the north. This should be what the Alliance said in the report to the tribe, that it was blown up by the floating city Dalajan. Even so, Naxxramas was still a daunting fortress. Soon, the fortress opened fire. As soon as they arrived, they unleashed a barrage of bullets. Many of the insects were badly mutilated, and their broken bodies and limbs fell from the sky. Huh? Sal frowned immediately. Great Chief, you also noticed? Woken said. Yes. Naxxramas' firepower is much weaker than I remember. As soon as Sal finished speaking, he found that Jaina had come. That's because after the Alliance seized Naxxramas, they discovered that many of the shadow magic towers couldn't be used. Jaina's crisp and slightly intellectual voice was pleasant to the ear no matter the time. Sal did not know that because of Duzay's appearance, his personal relationship with Jaina was destined to be two parallel lines that would never intersect. Seeing Jaina, who was supposed to be the core member of the assault team, appear in front of him so calmly, how could Sar not know the outcome? Still, he asked in disbelief, did the Alliance really take over Naxxramas? Jaina nodded. Yes, the evil soul of the great Lich Kel Thuzad has been completely purified. From today onwards, the former Scourge stronghold, Naxxramas, belongs to the Alliance. Sal and other tribal chiefs have an indescribable feeling in their hearts. Once upon a time, they thought that by going west to Kalimdor, they could get rid of the Alliance's control. As long as they could gain a foothold in this slightly barren land, they might be able to compete with the Alliance across the sea. If the establishment of Theramore was a nail in the hinterland of the tribe, and the Night Elves joining the Alliance was to further suppress the expansion space of the tribe, then this floating stronghold was obviously the scythe of death hanging over the tribe's head. Since the Scourge army could use Naxxramas to hang the major cities of the tribe, the Alliance could do the same. No, it could even be more than that. When the city of Duroder was first built, the tribe was very excited. At that time, the tribe's territory was also small. Who would have thought that Duke's arrangements were so far-reaching, attacking the new main city of the Orcs from the south and north? It was not obvious at first, but as the tribe continued to expand their settlements throughout the continent in order to compete for resources, they found that there was a noose around the tribe's neck, slowly strangling the tribe to death. The Alliance did not take the initiative to attack the tribe. After all, it was the insects that were slaughtering the people of the tribe. On the contrary, the Alliance still appeared in front of the tribe as allies and saviors. Oh. Next, it's up to the Alliance. Sal answered and sighed. In fact, the situation of the tribe could be described in one sentence: people who do not think far ahead will have immediate worries. If they did not deal with the raging insects, there was no threat to the Alliance at all. In mid-air, the huge floating stronghold suddenly seemed to disassemble itself, and several huge decorations on the outer wall fell from the air. That is... Sal murmured. Jaina laughed. How could the Alliance want that kind of decoration again? At this time, everyone saw clearly that it was Naxxramas who threw down the large skull relief sculpture that was the size of 10 football fields from the outer wall of the upper half of the stronghold. Yes, the Alliance was not pirates, nor was it the Scourge army. This kind of decoration that was meant to scare people, the Alliance would definitely not use it. The huge stone sculpture smashed down from 1,000 meters high, and immediately there was a tremor in the mountains. Of course, the effect was also obvious. The stone sculpture that was 30 meters thick came crashing down, and in the eyes of the insects, the scene was like the sky falling down. The huge and seemingly endless shadow pressed down, and the insects in the middle had no place to hide and were crushed into meat sauce on the spot. Splat! The insect slurry that splashed out from the cracks of the broken stone sculpture was a full 10 stories high. On the stronghold 2,000 meters away, almost every Alliance soldier who witnessed this scene could not help but grit their teeth. Immediately, they let out the most enthusiastic cheers. Ha 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 ha! Good! Kill those brainless insects. Long live the Alliance. Under the watchful eyes of the 100,000 Alliance soldiers on duty, Naxxramas moved again, slowly flying to the southeast of Cenarian's stronghold. The two strongholds, one on the ground and one in the air, formed a triangle with each other. Naxxramas descended. Because the speed of its descent was very slow, even when it landed on the ground, it did not cause much shaking. It only flattened several large sand dunes. On the side facing the railway, the stronghold opened a super gate that was at least 20 stories high, and a ramp that was 30 degrees from the ground descended. Jaina laughed. The Alliance is going to arm the entire Naxxramas stronghold as a mobile base to advance the front line. Now, on behalf of the Alliance commander Duke Marcus, I officially request the Horde to send about 2 clans of troops as the garrison of the stronghold. After that, Jaina showed Sal an official document written in both Orc and human common language, stamped with the seal of the Alliance command. Chapter 1292. At this moment, above Naxxramas, Magni was desperately complaining to his subordinates. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough at all. Didn't we inherit the will of the great Duke Marcus, the destruction dwarves who boast that explosions are art? What's the use of this small water gun? When did we become the destruction dwarves? The orange-red bearded dwarf quartermaster, Derek Banksu, complained in a low voice. Answer my question, quartermaster. Magni roared. Sorry, your majesty, our ships are all full. Although the supplies have been transported to the major ports in the Eastern Kingdom, due to transport capacity, we are barely able to meet the daily demand for artillery shells. We are unable to bear the demand for large-caliber artillery shells. If your majesty has the ability to guarantee the daily consumption of 100,000 tons of artillery shells, I don't mind adding any type of artillery your majesty needs in the next shipment. Derek's neck was red as he angrily rebuked his king. Dwarves were like this. As long as they were in the right, they would fight to the end. Magni knew he was in the wrong and had nothing to say. He had been busy with God's descent recently, and he really didn't know what the logistics situation was like. This was the inevitable drawback of modern warfare. Artillery had brought a whole new structure to Azeroth, which had always been dominated by cold weapons, stronger offensive and defensive capabilities. At the same time, it brought heavy pressure to the logistics. In the last battle of Mount Hyjal, because the route of retreat could be cut off at any time, it was more like a one-time deal. Supplies were done in one go. Anyway, the personnel and equipment were either dead or depleted, so there was no need to talk about supplies. It was different now. From the moment they settled in Cenarian Fortress, it was a tough defensive battle. The cost of destroying more than 1 million big bugs was the daily consumption of more than 10,000 tons of artillery shells. Even if all the long-distance ships in the Alliance that could cross the endless sea were used, the average capacity was only a little more than 5,000 tons. Even if Duque had the foresight to put several production lines of small-caliber artillery shells in Theramore, and the task of food supply was assigned to Theramore, the Night Elves, and the Horde. Almost all the transport capacity was loaded with munitions, but it was still not enough. As the bridgehead of the Alliance, Duque couldn't put the most expensive and cutting-edge production line there. What if someone smashed it or stole it? She wouldn't even have a place to cry. Derek reminded his king, Your Majesty, 90% of the munitions warehouses in Tanaris's hot sand port are full of rats. Magni frowned. 2 seconds later, the shameless dwarf king laughed and ran to the communication center. Duque, we're out of ammo. Can you conjure some bread like magic potions? On the other side, in front of the magic communication mirror, Duque rolled his eyes. Why don't you ask me to summon an army of 100 million and directly destroy Seath Thun? If it's possible, it's not bad too. Magni was shameless. Duque really wanted to curse. What do I need you for? But I just got a tiche, and I'm in a good mood, so I won't argue with you. Where is the place with the most ammunition? Magni turned his head, and Derek immediately answered, Menethil Port. Menethil Port was located in the Paladin Bay, north of Iron Furnace Castle. It was originally a garden-like port of Iron Furnace Castle, but it wasn't called that. In order to perfect the estuary of the dwarves' territory, Rotterdam almost exclusively helped the dwarves build this port. Hence, in order to commemorate the Menethil royal family, they named it that way. Now, the Alliance's industrial areas were mainly in the southern continent, and the specific functions were divided. According to the principle of proximity, Stormport was mostly used for transporting food and daily necessities, while the heavy industrial area was undoubtedly Iron Furnace Castle. Although in order to avoid being wiped out by the enemy, Iron Furnace Castle also transported a lot of munitions to Stormport through the underground railway of Stormwind City, and then loaded onto ships to be transported across the sea. Most of the munitions were still stored in Menethil Port. Faced with Magni's request, Duque scratched his head, and finally nodded. "Alright, I'll do it temporarily, but don't expect me to have free mana every day." With one order from above, the subordinates ran like crazy. In Cenarian Fortress, the Alliance army was in a complete mess. "Move, move. There's an order from above, empty warehouses 1 to 10 in an hour." Originally, these warehouses were used to store ammunition. Now that there was a lack of ammunition, they were all filled with cannons and steam tanks that were either scrapped or waiting to be repaired. The group of dwarves blew their beards and stared, completely dumbfounded. There was only so much empty space in the relatively safe defensive circle of the fortress. Where were they supposed to move the things in such a short time? 1 hour. Not to mention tools, they couldn't even make it in time when there was a serious lack of steam cranes. Hence, a majestic scene appeared. A large group of dwarves either drove the deity's descent, or pulled the tribe's warriors over to be strong men. In Menethil Port, the dwarves were originally very lazy. Apart from the sentries and patrols, the dwarves were so bored that they were bragging. It couldn't be helped. The Alliance's ships were basically very accurate. When there were no ships, no matter how many munitions the Iron Furnace Castle transported, they could only be thrown into the warehouse at the port. Suddenly, the Alliance's lieutenants rushed into the barracks. "Hurry, hurry. Alliance Commander Duke Marcus's direct order, prepare all the ammunition and large-caliber cannons stored in the warehouse within an hour. Bring them all to the square and wait for orders." The dwarves' quartermaster and logistics personnel were all dumbfounded. "So much. How do we transport it? There are at least 300,000 tons of cannon ammunition here. And that's not counting the ones stuffed on the road. Where did the Alliance get these new fleets? How would I know? Maybe the Alliance's strongest mages are preparing to open a portal." This dwarf lieutenant's words were like a prophecy. Right. He guessed right. Duque was going to open a portal directly. After the tens of thousands of people below were exhausted, Duque didn't care so much. He just held up a tiche and started working. Thinking back, this thing could only open a Karazhan portal and send people to Karazhan. Duque muttered to himself. Of course, as a good, pure, and lawful citizen, Duke would often use a tiche to open a Karazhan teleportation portal beside the teleportation portal that the other mages had opened to return to Iron Stove Castle or Dalaran. Of course, as a good, pure, and lawful citizen, Duke knew that many of his party members were very talented in destroying the Hearthstones that could teleport them home. He even put the two portals almost together. In the end, a bunch of people who didn't know the truth were bitterly sent to Karazhan in the wilderness just like that. It was purely a slip of my hand. You really can't blame me. Ha 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 ha. No one would have thought that an evil priest could actually open a Karazhan portal. At that time, Duque was scolded quite a bit, but Duque was very proud. He had one of the 1167 Atish in the entire national server. Chapter 1293. At the side, Elucia watched as Duque fell into a state of reminiscence and almost drooled wickedly. Even Elucia, who was most agreeable to Duque, could not help but facepalm. Please, Duque, please pay attention to your image. If your image collapses, it will affect us, alright? Sorry. It did not matter what he looked like. Wandering around without knowing how bad he looked was a capital offense. Duque's expression froze. He was that sanctimonious fake king again. Oh, no, he was that handsome commander of the Alliance again. After advancing to breaking dawn, Duque rarely chanted magic. Whenever he needed to chant, it would be a large-scale spell. The next moment, Duque's voice traversed space and time, echoing in the sky above Menethil Port and Cenarian Fortress at the same time. It seemed close, yet far. The chanting was filled with ethereal inspiration, as if Duque's voice did not come from the other side of space, but from the divine domain. The incantation for the portal was a magic incantation that every Radiant Moon Archmage had to learn. After countless generations of cuts and improvements, it had become unchangeable. O lost soul wandering the world, may the stars give you guidance. May the earth bear your burden. In the name of Duke Marcus, I open a bridge that connects heaven and earth, and turn the natural moat into a path. The incantation was the main point, but the series of spatial coordinates that appeared in his mind at the same time was the most important. For something like spatial teleportation, if one only needed to teleport between two places without any gap, then one only needed to remember the starting and destination coordinates. However, Azeroth was also a self-moving planet. To complete a continuous teleportation for a long period of time, one had to constantly change the spatial coordinates according to the planet's self-movement. Simply put, it required a series of absolutely correct spatial movement formulas. Any mistake would cause the teleporter to be beheaded at best, or disappear forever in a spatial rift in the worst. This was why teleportation often only happened between mages and major cities. Now, what Duque wanted to complete was definitely a great spell that could be recorded in the annals of history. On Duque's retina, a huge amount of data poured down. The system elf's prompts kept coming, spatial coordinates loaded. Calculation of spatial variable formula completed. The coordinates have been tested 233,333 times. The error rate is infinitely close to zero. Self-examination complete. Begin teleportation. Open portal 1 to 128. That's right, Duque was just that awesome. What he couldn't do in the past, Duque could now easily do with the help of the divine artifact Atish. Of course, with his limit, it would not be a problem for him to open 1024 portals at the same time. Considering the continuity and risk involved, Duque decided to be very safe and open 128 doors first. In the open space of Menethil Port, the dwarven logistics troops were all stunned as if they had seen a miracle. They stared at the desert world and the magnificent elven-style fortress on the other side of the portal, completely speechless. All of the dwarf's flattery and speech were stuck in his throat. What are you waiting for? Do not increase the burden on Commander Marcus. On the fortress side, the dwarf quartermaster Derek's angry voice finally woke up the dazed guys on the other side a little. The dwarves immediately shouted and began to hurriedly send the munitions boxes through the various portals along the makeshift conveyor belt. Be careful, idiots. Even if there is shock absorption equipment inside, if it accidentally explodes, it will blow us all up into the sky. The third team. First transport the 155mm ones. The cannons on the other side have priority in resupplying ammunition. Before starting, every field officer had given a death order to the lieutenant below. The lieutenant gave a death order to the non-commissioned officers. Most of them very cordially conveyed to their subordinates, such as, the cannonballs that can't be transported will be stuffed into your mouth, so none of the dwarves dared to be lazy. In addition, Duque used a projection to mark the remaining time on each portal, which made every dwarf move more quickly. In the Cenarian fortress, the tribe was also shocked to the point of being completely speechless. Could such a large-scale teleportation really be done by mortals? Sal's body leaned slightly to the left, and a ghost-like shadow appeared beside him, the former Sun King, now the leader of the Forgotten, Anastrian. As a newly promoted tribal leader, Anastrian put his position in the right place, at least it looked like this. He covered his left chest with his right hand and bowed slightly. I can't do it. At most 3 portals of the same level, each delivering 50 fully armed tribal warriors, is already the limit, and the consumption of magic gems is massive. If the well of the sun was still in my hands, then it would be 10 portals at most. Wajin asked in a low voice, aren't you all Breaking Dawn archmages? Anastrian's mouth was bitter. In terms of rank, I'm not much different from Duke Marcus. But his talent in the field of multicasting is above me. The key is that my thieves saw that he inherited the divine staff of the previous guardian, Mediv. The legendary astral staff that can break through space, Atish, the legendary staff of the guardian. Sal muttered to himself, and the bitterness in his voice became even stronger. Although he didn't know what price Duque had to pay for such a large-scale teleportation, it wouldn't be too light, but it definitely wouldn't be too heavy, otherwise no one would be able to afford it. Even so, the Alliance's epoch-making supply method had already made the Horde look up to it. If it was just the flying warships, the Horde still had a chance to imitate and catch up, but the flying fortresses and large-scale teleportation made Sal completely despair. This was already something that had nothing to do with the technology tree or talent. Unless the tribe was lucky enough to dig up another floating fortress left behind by the Titans and get their hands on a space staff that was close to Atisha's, not to mention that they had complete trust in Anastrian and were not afraid of her betrayal. Damn, there were so many ifs, and if they could all be done, it would be a miracle among miracles. The reason why miracles were called miracles was because they were basically impossible to happen. Sal's heart was heavy. In fact, this was Sal thinking too much. In the original history, during the period of the King of Draenor, the Alliance and the Horde jointly attacked Draenor, which did not explode. It was in the Moon Shadow Valley that the Alliance quickly built a huge fortress almost from nothing. What did they rely on? It was by relying on the portal. A large number of soldiers and craftsmen came from the huge portal. Materials such as wood and stones were locally obtained, but craftsmen and key alloy parts were all transported from the major cities of the Alliance across planets. In that era, cross-space supplies and strikes had long since become commonplace. It was just that Duque had realized it earlier. As for the Horde's strong minds suffering 100,000 points of critical damage, Duque said, he would not take the blame for this. Chapter 1294. The Dalajan could also fly, but the Dalajan was the capital of a country. It wouldn't be good if it was damaged on the front lines. If the mage towers in the outer perimeter were to be destroyed, the Novice Mage Training Institute in the center would be damaged. Forget about whether Luo Ning, who had died somewhere, would be furious when he returned. Duke would definitely be heartbroken. Right now, Dalaran was his backyard and a training ground for talents. So whether it was attacking or defending, Naxxramas had to go first. As the strongest offensive fortress in the Alliance, if it didn't have tens of thousands of cannons, how could it satisfy the vanity of Duke, who was a proponent of cannons and ships? But it wasn't easy to rebuild the flying stronghold. If there was anyone to blame, it was Duque's fault for tormenting Naxxramas too thoroughly. First, he let the Dalajan give it a shot, then it fell from the sky into Kiraj, where the bugs almost tore it apart. In the end, Duque gave up a few areas in order to clean it up. Naxxramas was now empty inside. Many places were hollow, and who knew how long it would take to rebuild. But the Alliance didn't have the time to do this. Duque could only use the system to calculate the balance and install cannons on the stronghold first. Balance was very important. Whether it was a ship or a plane, it had to be calculated before departure, otherwise it would overturn. With the plague area almost completely destroyed, the weight of the cannons was a huge project. Fortunately, Duque had the system elf to help him calculate. It took a full 3 days for the dwarven craftsmen to work overtime, almost without sleep, to help Naxxramas install about 2,000 cannons and prepare about 50,000 tons of shells. Although 50,000 tons was a lot, before industrialization, the dwarven things were all thick and hard. It wasn't much to use. But, it's enough for now, Duque concluded. In the command hall of Naxxramas, there was a sudden uproar. When do we attack? The one who asked was Lord Rorgrom. For the brave orcs, they had only been defending and not attacking for a while. Moreover, the few huge bug nests in the Silithus region were the biggest scourge. As long as the worm nest was not destroyed, the worm queen inside would be able to continuously produce a large number of large worms and cause trouble everywhere. These destructive bugs, or bugmen, were absolutely terrifying. They didn't mind meat or vegetables, and anything that could be called a living creature could be their food. The vultures in the sky, the scorpions and snakes in the desert, and even the cacti could be their prey. Just like that, the queen of the swarm unscrupulously replenished her nutrients, and then gave birth to 4-digit eggs every day. In less than 10 days, a new batch of giant insects would emerge from their cocoons and continue to wreak havoc everywhere. Therefore, destroying the hive was imperative. Faced with Master Howl's question, Duque pondered for a moment and said, "The day after tomorrow. I'll greet the dragons first." Duque didn't notice, or perhaps Duque intentionally or unintentionally saw a pair of eyes filled with hatred because of the words, "the day after tomorrow." Compared to the tribes whose homes had been destroyed, there was a leader of the alliance who hated these worms even more. But ever since he arrived at Cenarian Fortress, nothing was up to him. Yes. He was Fandral Staghelm. Having lost his son, he was eager to attack the swarm, but Tyrant held him down tightly, forbidding him and his elite druid troops from leaving the fortress to attack before the main force returned. In the end, he even hated Duque. Now that Duque was attacking from the rear in order to reorganize, it made him grit his teeth even more. But Duque ignored him. He let Magni discuss the deployment of troops with Thrall, while he used the compass to find Alexstrasza. "Yo! Your Highness, are you worried about the big trash in the void? The remains of the Burning Legion's warships." The Red Dragon Queen's eyes lit up in the magic mirror. The continuous battle in the void had caused great losses to both sides. The dragons dead had their companions collect their corpses and send them back to Dragonbone Waste to be buried, but the large number of space warships used by demons became a headache. If it was the corpses of demons, the dragons could use their powerful bodies to ram through them, but the harder and larger wreckages could not. And as the number of wreckages increased, the dragon's ability to find enemies decreased. Alexstrasza's interest was piqued when Duque suddenly mentioned the big trash. "Hee, what good suggestion do you have?" "Let's hear it." No one knew what Duque discussed with the queen. Anyway, the day of the army's deployment was fast approaching. Door of Darkness 22, March 18, 8 a.m. Uncharacteristically, Duque wasn't in charge of the Alliance's main attack this time. The commander-in-chief was Magni, the cannon maniac, while Thrall and Tyrande were in charge. Outsiders might not understand, but those familiar with the Alliance knew that under Duque's guidance, the Alliance had long since abandoned the medieval style of warfare. Now, as long as the conditions allowed it, they would use their cannons to bombard everything that could move within their field of vision. No, today was a little more special. Standing on the platform that Naxxramas had specially opened up, looking down at the ground 3,000 meters above the ground, it was a strange feeling. This height had long surpassed the height that flying insects could climb. What was a beating up? This was a beating up. Thrall's eyes narrowed. He could already see the outcome of this battle. This was like using cannons to fight primitive people. It was just that unreasonable. "All right. Your Excellency Tyrande Whisperwind, since Duque has left the opening to you, my little fellows and I will watch the show first." Magni gave up the main position. "Thank you, Your Majesty Bronzebeard." Tyrande didn't stand on ceremony and stood in the middle. Time was up. Tyrande raised her head slightly. Her clear eyes seemed to emit two sharp rays of divine light. It pierced through space, through the clouds, and looked straight into space. A second later, Tyrande's long green hair suddenly started to flutter even though there was no wind. She only wore a golden bracelet, and her well-developed arms were raised high, revealing the beautiful lines of her muscles. She focused all of her attention, as if she was searching for something and guiding something. She shone brightly, and under Elun's divine power, the clear sky suddenly darkened. The sun and clouds seemed to have disappeared, and everyone could suddenly see the stars in the sky. Above the atmosphere, a void battleship that had been broken for who knew how many years was being pulled by several ancient dragons was changing its orbit, falling from the planet's synchronous orbit into the designated route. Soon, in the pitch-black void, a long line of fire lit up the entire defense area of the dragon aspect. Even in the midst of patrolling, the soaring dragons still turned their necks to look at that bright red. Chapter 1295. Rumble. The entire atmosphere rumbled. Even if the officers repeatedly warned the soldiers below, even if these soldiers were not new recruits, after seeing this scene and listening to the terrifying sound in the sky, the soldiers were still restless. In the sky above Silithus, a bright line of fire suddenly appeared from the sky. When the line of fire was imprinted in Thrall's resolute eyes, no one could see Thrall's expression. He still held the semi-divine weapon, Hammer of Destruction, tightly, but this famous weapon seemed to be not worth mentioning in the face of the terrifying attack that was about to happen. Thrall seemed to be in deep thought, and his green face seemed to be much paler than before. The golden light descended from the sky and was reflected in the deepest part of the eyes of every Alliance soldier. It seemed to be a long parabola drawn from the distant realm of the gods. Under the continuous gestures of the elven high priest, it turned into a stream of light from far to near. Everyone subconsciously turned their heads so that their eyes could follow the light. The golden light left a long afterimage in their field of vision, and it hit the ash insect nest directly north of Cenarian Fortress. It exploded with a loud bang, like a dazzling flower blooming with golden flames. It was 50 stories tall, and it looked like a gigantic insect tower made of solid rubber, but it collapsed with a single strike. Not only that, the entire insect nest couldn't withstand this sky-high attack at all, and there were signs of subsidence. The insect army guarding the insect nest was lifted up by the huge flame shock wave, thrown away, and dismembered into countless pieces, finally falling like raindrops. Within a diameter of a kilometer, it was full of flames, and the smoke and dust even swept up to 5,000 meters away. Wow! Magni whistled loudly. At the same time, almost all the Alliance soldiers on the cannons and portholes of the fortress who witnessed this scene let out fiery cheers. Ha ha ha! Good job! Burn these dog bugs! Burn, burn, burn! Burn them all! Although they didn't suffer many losses in the past few days, they were surrounded and attacked by dozens of insects, and their defense line was broken from time to time. Now, seeing one of the leaders of the Alliance, Tyrande, use such a powerful starfall, every soldier couldn't help but be excited. Who didn't want to have a powerful boss? Who didn't want their boss to stand up bravely at a critical moment, break the balance, and win? Unknowingly, every night elf looked at Tyrande with eyes full of worship. TCH. It's not like Tyrande can use such a powerful starfall. Fandral Staghelm gritted his teeth. He was right. Of course, Tyrande didn't have the divine power to summon such a large meteorite fragment. This was the wreckage of the void warship that Duke had the Dragon Clan drop at the designated time and place after he had calculated the angle of incidence with the system. Since it was a fragment, its irregular shape would naturally cause all sorts of accidents when passing through the atmosphere. But that wasn't important. Tyrande, who was used to starfall, even with Alun's help, even if she didn't have the power to pull such a large floating object out of its orbit, she could still use Alun's divine power to guide the target to where she wanted it to go. This was an incomparably accurate strike. Of course, the higher-ups wouldn't tell the people below what was going on. The night elves knelt on the spot, all prostrating themselves to Tyrande, the incarnation of goddess Alun. In their eyes, this was a miracle that Alun had personally performed. In terms of power, this was indeed a miracle. One more wave, and the divine power that the goddess has bestowed upon me will be used up. After that, I will need to rest for at least a week. Following Duque's plan, Tyrande lied without batting an eyelid. In fact, this wasn't just to guard against the Horde, it was also to guard against possible spies in the Alliance army. Also, clusters of starlight continued to rise from Tyrande's body into the sky. As if responding to her twinkling starlight, a golden curtain of light slowly descended from the sky. It was like countless small suns that had fallen into the mortal realm. It was accompanied by Tyron's melodious and mysterious incantation. They arrived in the blink of an eye, like a rainstorm in May. They landed within the range of the ashworm nest. Rumble, under the acceleration of gravity, the warship fragments became the most terrifying weapons of destruction. They tore through the sky and crashed into the worm nest with terrifying kinetic energy that no one in this era could understand. Not only did they cause the most terrifying massacre, but they also caused earth-shattering destruction. With the naked eye, everyone could see that the entire worm nest was collapsing. It wasn't just 1.5 meters, but a huge hole that was as high as a 10-story building. Finally, Starfall was over. Tyrant collapsed as if she had lost all her strength. Tyrant. Sasha, who was beside her, reacted quickly and caught her. She really did collapse. However, only she, Duque and Elun knew that this was far from her limit. She didn't use Elun's power to replenish her stamina. Good work. Now, it's time for the dwarves to perform. Magni bowed slightly, then stood on the main seat and shouted, "Kids, use the white phosphorus bombs, incendiary bombs, and heavy oil bombs." 2 minutes later, the rumbling of cannons could be heard throughout the flying fortress. The ashworm lair was already on fire. After all, the falling meteors weren't real fire elemental attacks. Now that they had enough ammunition, the dwarves turned the entire worm nest into a sea of fire. Speaking of which, if these things were used on humans, it would definitely be insane. For example, if the white phosphorus bombs burned a person, they could burn through the skin all the way to the bones. It felt like it was comparable to the skinning spells of the Calamity Army. If it was used on insects, who cares if they die? Only dead insects are good insects. Understand? The furious cannons continued for a full hour. After firing off over 10,000 tons of cannons, the beast men were already numb to the sound of shells retracting, not to mention the continuous sound of cannons. Fortunately, they had given out earplugs early on. Otherwise, all of them would have become deaf. Until noon, when the Alliance and Horde mages used large-scale magic formations to cast war-level spells and extinguish the fire with frost, it was finally the infantry's turn. Go! We need to find the queen of the worm nest. We just want her corpse. The infantry of the Allied army, who had been holding back for so long, finally had a use. Chapter 1296. Where was Duque when the Alliance army was in full swing? Duque quietly went to Lordaeron and then returned to Karazhan. At the highest level of Karazhan, which was also the most central position of this unique space, the decorations left by the previous master, Medivh, had been replaced. Duque sat on a throne condensed from arcane energy. The throne behind him was like the roots of a tree. Arcane energy, like electricity, connected every room in Karazhan, as if it was sucking magic from every corner of the entire mage tower. Under Duque's feet was like a huge piece of transparent glass. He could see the hundreds of libraries below, which were filled with millions of magic books. Duque sitting here was more like an extension of the magic knowledge, except that he happened to be sitting on the spire that symbolized supreme knowledge. Unlike the dominance and arrogance of other kings, Duque was filled with a kind of majesty that symbolized mysterious power. He was motionless, like a statue. His deep gaze crossed time and space, staring at every corner of the mage tower. The Einherjar guarding the entrance of the gate, the Einherjar attendants preparing to welcome guests in the arched hall that towered like the sky, the Saintess of Chastity waiting for the enemy at the end of the arcade, the curator who was vigilant in the library. The depths of Duque's eyes were like the well of eternity that constantly produced magic, or like the endless sea that could condense terrifying whirlpools. The spiral-shaped magic waves made him even more mysterious. Under the throne, several beings of different shapes and forms expressed their respect in their own ways. Majordomo Executus, the fire demon manager from the Molten Core, put his right claw on his left chest and bowed slightly. Opposite him, the frost elemental dragon, Sapphiron, who had just been redeemed by Duque from Naxxramas, bowed its noble head. Farina, the black witch, who exuded a shadow aura, wore a white gauze evening dress. It seemed that she didn't want to give Duque a bad impression. This white gauze dress was quite conservative, with a high neckline, and nothing revealing on the chest or back. She stood there in the most ladylike posture. If it was in the past, she might have had some unnecessary thoughts, but ever since she had the existence of the person standing opposite her, she didn't have any other thoughts. She couldn't think of anything. That's right. That person was an existence that everyone in the human kingdom knew about. The former Archbishop of Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. If he had a choice, Duque did not want to disturb this great saint's rest. But Duque had no choice but to do this, because he only had shadow. Without the holy elemental emissary, he would most likely be finished. Originally, Alonso's would not be able to rest in peace. During the Scourge invasion, the plague infected the lands of Lordaeron. From Alonso's Fail's grave, a mindless zombie was born. At first, it was just an accident. Even the generals of the Scourge didn't realize that there was such a guy in the Scourge. However, as time went by, Alonso's regained his consciousness. He hid and searched for the survivors of the Rotterdam kingdom. Kalia Menethil, the last living member of the Rotterdam royal family, was found and protected by Fail. He also established a secret sect to observe the situation of the war in Azeroth, and even recruited members from the Forsaken. For a long time, Kalia and Fail hid in Lordaeron. Until Willan, who was one of the 3 leaders of Eredar along with Kil, Jaden and Archimonde, came to Azeroth after rejecting Sardra's corruption. The 2 leaders of the Holy Light hit it off, and they formed a secret alliance to prepare for the future war between the Light and Dark factions. In this life, Lordaeron was recovered, and Alonso's grave, which Duque had been protecting, was not destroyed. Duque was able to summon Alonso's soul. If there is a shadow, there must be light. Otherwise, it will only gradually sink and fall. I hope that you can continue to guide me and continue to fight for the future of Azeroth. When Duque made this request, Alonso's Fail agreed to become Duque's Holy Light elemental emissary without hesitation. At this moment, looking at the Archbishop of Holy Light standing in front of her with a gentle and amiable smile, Farina felt as if she had been scolded by a dog. She had a premonition that if she dared to mess around, she would definitely have a hard time in the future. With a top-notch holy soul, Alonso's talent was unquestionable. However, there were too many existences with shadow souls. Even if Alonso's couldn't be replaced, Farina could be replaced at any time. Farina felt like crying. Next to Alonso's was the Redemption Knight Thaddeus, who had reverted to the appearance of a paladin. He no longer appeared in the form of a monster. His soul looked like that of a paladin, but instead of bursting out with crackling lightning, he was a natural element Thunder Knight. Unknowingly, Duque had gathered 5 elemental emissaries. However, everyone knew that there was at least one more. As a priest, Holy and Shadow were necessary. Similarly, as a mage, once they had Fire and Frost, all that was left was arcane magic. It was not easy to find a special soul that could contain powerful arcane magic and treat arcane magic as a life form. For a while, Farina sometimes thought maliciously that Ronan's disappearance was fake, and that Duque had actually killed Ronan and made him an elemental emissary. Fortunately, the Black Witch did not dare to say this out loud. Otherwise, Duque would definitely serve her with leather whips and candles. Cough, cough, torture. Fortunately, Duque had obtained such a powerful arcane magic soul almost at the beginning of Duque's rise to fame. The door of the hall opened with a loud bang. Under the gaze of the 12 Einherjar guards, a soul mage slowly walked in. Walking on the bright red carpet, his appearance could not be considered heroic, but he had a dignified air of a scholar. He wore a hood-like, Mind Union headgear, and a dark blue, Edward's Will, that complemented the complex elvish style. In his left hand was a red prismatic crystal, and in his right hand was a Nazresm's soul blade, that looked like a cluster of flames. On his back was a fiery red, secret ruby cloak, that fluttered in the wind, and the ring of grim storm, on his finger was shining. This gorgeous mage equipment was comparable to that of the main force of the Alliance's hero squad. In the original history, he would have been the one to shine brilliantly. Unfortunately, in this life, he was unlucky and was killed by Sargeras. But that was not important. After managing Karazhan for Duque for more than 20 years, he finally stepped onto the glorious stage of Azeroth. Yes. His name was Khadgar. Chapter 1297. Khadgar was supposed to be the third great mage who could destroy the heavens and the earth. In history, he would often single-handedly blow up bridges, block dams, and cause chaos to the iron horde that was created by the brainless roar that ran away. Looking at Khadgar's translucent face, which was still young because of his early death, Duque felt a little guilty. But this was fate. If not for Duque, perhaps he would still be as powerful as he was in history. Since Duque had taken over his fate and done better than him, Khadgar could only do so. If not for Duque needing an arcane elemental emissary to break through to the demigod level, Khadgar would probably still be a pitiful earthbound spirit in Karazhan. Managing the library and fighting the occasional invading monsters, this was Khadgar's unchanging life. His translucent spirit body was clad in solid cloth armor, and he did look a little out of place. Soon, this would not be a problem. Lightly putting down the magic weapon in his hand, Khadgar pressed his hands to the ground and made a standard bow. Great Archmage, my lord, Duke Marcus. Your loyal servant, Khadgar, has come to pay his respects. The once young mage's voice was now filled with indescribable excitement. He had been dead for too long, so long that he had almost forgotten how it felt to be alive. This did not mean that he did not want to be resurrected. Not in the form of a filthy undead, but as some kind of life, to truly reappear in the world, just like his master, Medivh. Resurrection was the privilege of the gods. One had to at least step into the demigod level to have the right to discuss this issue. Now, in front of him was a chance to become Duque's elemental emissary and become an elemental creature, just like Batdius and Alonso's. Sitting on the throne, listening to Khadgar's sincere greeting, Duque felt a strange sense of absent-mindedness. He felt as if he and Khadgar had been reversed. If Khadgar had not died, or if he, Duque, had been more capable 20 years ago and had discovered a cultivation method specifically for ghosts, would Khadgar have had a better life? Fine. There was no point in making assumptions. Duque sighed softly. Since it was already like this in this life, there was no need for him to feel ashamed. I've never seen such a shameless person before. Yes, I've seen it today. Duque then put on a serious face and slightly raised his chin. Khadgar. How many years have you served me in the form of a heroic spirit? Khadgar lowered his head deeply. It has been 22 years, my lord. All this time, I have been doing my best to fulfill the duties of a servant and help you protect Karazhan. Duque raised his right hand, and a pair of arcane palms appeared out of thin air, helping Karthika up. Khadgar stood up, still maintaining his slightly bowed posture. Very good. I can see how loyal you are. I've always felt sorry for your tragic fate. Duque cleared his throat and continued, I've always believed that the reason why people are noble is because they have the desire for knowledge, the desire to explore, and the courage to fight against fate. Tell me, Khadgar, are you willing to be a ghost mage forever? Khadgar took a deep breath, even though this action was meaningless to a ghost. If this is your will, my lord, I will accept it. The corner of Duque's mouth rose. Unknowingly, Khadgar had already learned so many ways to speak. Back then, he had still been a hothead, perhaps, this was what growth was like. Age and circumstances would always smooth out one's edges. Right now, I have a better and more dangerous choice for you. You can choose to become my arcane elemental emissary and help me control the power of the arcane domain. But the price is that from the moment you agree, you will become a special life form attached to me. If I die, or fail to become a demigod, you will be like me, soul. Fly. Soul. Disperse. Do you understand what I've said? Faced with Duque's question, Khadgar nodded again and said solemnly, very clearly. That's right, if he maintained his current state, Duque would definitely let him continue to be the administrator of Karazhan. But so what? With Duque's immortal state, Unless Duque died in battle, waiting for the next ruler of Karazhan was something that would never happen. If Khadgar could not even grasp this opportunity and did not have the courage to do so, how could he rise in the future? Without even half a second of hesitation, Khadgar raised his head and said in a clear voice, "If this is the choice you give me, my lord, then I will choose to fight with all my strength. I hope to become a higher and stronger life form and help you, my lord." A smile blossomed on Duque's face. "Very good. This is the Khadgar I know, the one who never lacks wisdom and dares to challenge himself." Duque stood up and slowly walked down the stairs made of the purest arcane energy. He raised his right hand, his palm facing Khadgar's forehead. "Khadgar, what I am about to do is different from the other elemental emissaries. You know that. Arcane magic is the most basic and important core of the three elements of a mage. Thus, I will modify your soul so that your new form will be completely connected to my magic circuit. Your soul will be an extension of my magic circuit. And you will become the core commander of the other elemental emissaries. I'm not afraid to tell you that this process will be very painful. In a sense, to use an inaccurate analogy, if Duke was a complete iPhone and smartphone, then an ordinary elemental emissary would most likely become an existence equivalent to a power bank in normal times. They would help Duque communicate with the elemental realm, absorbing and filtering more elemental energy for Duque to use. However, Khadgar would become Duke's auxiliary chip, RAM, and power bank, a special existence that combined all of these functions into one. He would be able to use magic to attack enemies for Duque, but he would also be like a command tower. Duque would even give Khadgar a portion of the system elf's computing power. Because recently, the system elf had finally reached its limit. When calculating the trajectory of the warship wreckage in the atmosphere, Duque felt a wave of fatigue. Faced with Duque's physique, Khadgar's reply was resolute. "I can endure it." Indeed, only someone as talented as Khadgar would be able to withstand this pressure. "Then let's begin." Duque's palm lightly pressed against Khadgar's forehead. As his palm felt a slight chill, a large amount of magical information began to rush into Khadgar's sea of consciousness. Ugh! Khadgar let out a muffled groan. Chapter 1298. Everything in the world had to be done step by step, and Karthika didn't have extraordinary talent from the very beginning, directly becoming the world-destroying great master of true virtue. In history, Khadgar had inherited Mediva's legacy and spent more than 20 years to become a true powerhouse. In this life, Khadgar had died when he was still weak. Even though Duque had made him a heroic spirit mage after his death and had given him the right to read all of Karazhan's libraries, as well as the right to absorb other souls to strengthen himself, he had still lacked experience. That kind of life and death experience. Truthfully speaking, only a soul that had withstood all sorts of trials and tribulations and truly matured would have the soul strength that Duque needed for the elemental emissary core. The moment he touched Khadgar's soul, Duque knew that he was disappointed. Not enough. Far from enough. Khadgar's soul strength was barely on the level of a radiant moon mage. In the alliance, he was only slightly better than mages like Gina Goldsword, and he couldn't even compare to Astromancer Solarian, who had joined Duque's side. The arcane energy that Duque had poured into Khadgar's body quickly reached saturation. It wasn't that Duque didn't want to pour it in, but that he couldn't. Even if Duque created new magic circuits for Khadgar on the spot, Khadgar's soul wouldn't be able to withstand these circuits. Duque's eyelids twitched violently. The problem now lay in front of Duque. Should he give up or find a new path? Khadgar's entire body trembled violently. He was very clear about the state of his soul. At this moment, Duque had almost stopped pouring mana into him. Compared to Duque's boundless, ocean-like mana, Khadgar's capacity was far too small. "Master. Have I disappointed you?" "No, I should say that I was too impatient for success." Then, Duque let go of his hand and fell into a long silence. Using the elemental emissary to help him share the burden of becoming a demigod by relying on multiple elemental domains seemed to be stuck. Everything must be divided into primary and secondary. Without a core, there would be no branches. As the foundation of magic, the existence of the Arcana School was absolutely necessary. Similarly, the Arcana School's elemental envoys were also necessary. Duque repeatedly searched through his mind. Apart from Khadgar, Duque could not think of anyone else who could become an Arcana Technique elemental core. Arcana techniques were the foundation and the most versatile of them all. A brainless and untalented fellow would never be able to shoulder such a heavy responsibility. The air was silent. Suddenly, Khadgar moved. He slowly knelt down. His movements seemed to be in slow motion, and every detail was filled with reverence. My lord, I feel that the limits of my soul shouldn't stop here. I think I should have a greater possibility. If you have any other methods, master, I am willing to give it a try. Even if my soul is annihilated, I will not hesitate. Khadgar gritted his teeth, a resolute expression on his face. It was almost the expression of a martyr. The surrounding elemental emissaries originally had the mentality of watching the ceremony, but at this moment, their expressions completely changed. There were no whispers, no whispers. The air was filled with a fanatical and focused aura. Duque took a deep breath and raised his head. After muttering to himself for a few seconds, he lowered his head and looked at Khadgar. Khadgar, did you know? I once traveled through time and space and went to the ancient war 10,000 years ago. I've heard of it. At that time, I borrowed the power of the Time King, Nozdormu, to peek into Azeroth's past and future. At the same time, I also saw you in a different timeline. Being able to reverse the flow of time and enter a different parallel space sounded like a fantasy. As a pursuer of magic, an explorer of the source of magic, and an official disciple of the Mediv, Khadgar's understanding of time and space far surpassed that of others. Suddenly, Khadgar smiled bitterly, and an expression appeared on his face as if he was about to cry. Is the Khadgar in a different timeline more useful than me? Not just useful, but incomparably glorious. This will be a long story. Are you willing to listen? Khadgar. Khadgar nodded solemnly. Together. Since the beginning of the Dark Portal. Duque's voice became ethereal and illusory. At the same time, a thought wave entered Khadgar's soul. This was a video created by the system elf using a full 3D image. After it was slightly blurred, it felt exactly the same as when Duque peeked into the river of time. Khadgar was deeply immersed in this seemingly illusory image that was connected to his fate. It was as if another part of his life had been highly condensed, and Khadgar was soon unable to differentiate which part was his true memories, and which part was what Duque had shown him, which part was his fate in the other world of balance. No. It was not just a look. Khadgar was completely immersed in it. He could clearly understand why he had made this decision. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, what kind of emotions and thoughts did he have to make each and every decision? In this world without Duke Marcus, that's right. Everything had changed. In that world, it was Khadgar, Garona, and Lothar who had raided Karazhan. It was also him who had unfortunately been hit by Mediva's spell, causing him to have white hair and wrinkled skin at a young age. It was also him who had killed Sargeras. Unfortunately, from that moment on, he had also become the murderer of his teacher, the savior of a nameless world. He remembered every detail of his immersion in the study of portal magic. He clearly remembered that the dark portal had opened again, and the orcs had begun to attack the watchtower. How the orcs had used simple weapons to destroy the human infantrymen, smashing their helmets to death, and cutting off their shields and arms. He also personally decided that in order to completely stop Zul's evil plan, he would lead a coalition of humans, dwarves, and elves together with Turalian, Daneth Trollbane, Aurelia, and Kudrin on an expedition to the Draenor world in an attempt to hunt down Zul. In the end, in the final battle of Draenor, Ricard ushered in that fateful explosion. He could still remember that his mouth was wide open, and he screamed silently. But he had to do everything he could to stop this terrifying explosion. Such a huge amount of energy. It was like a spreading flame on the plains, running wildly through his body, burning his magic circuits, and making it almost unbearable for his senses. Then, everything returned to silence. Soon, he turned from a participant to a third-person spectator. He, Khadgar, was regarded as one of the 5 heroes of the Dark Portal, and a statue was erected in the King's Valley in Stormwind City. I am a hero. Chapter 1299. A piece of history that seemed to come from another world stirred up all of Khadgar's memories that had been sealed away for a long time. In the past, he had many dreams as a youth. He dreamed of being a great hero who saved the world, dreamed of becoming the greatest mage, and left his name in history. His parents had sent him to the Dalajan to receive training, and this was what they had taught him. When his innate talent had been activated and he had become a disciple of Medivh, this was also what he had longed for. Goals were different from dreams. Goals could be achieved through hard work and time. But dreams were loftier and more distant. All of a sudden, he was told that in the other world of Azeroth, he was a hero. All of a sudden, all of his dreams, all of his vanity, and even the occasional hollow feeling in his chest were filled in an instant. The feelings that had been dormant in his soul for a long time seemed to have been awakened. So, I can also be this strong, and I can be so worshipped. This feeling was truly wonderful, but in the next moment, Khadgar was startled awake. Was this hero still him? Did the things that happened in the parallel world have anything to do with the main timeline that he was currently in? Khadgar's head suddenly jerked backwards, and his entire body arched backwards. Perhaps in that world, he was like the main character in all the legends of heroes, the gathering point of the world. But it was precisely this feeling of reality that brought him a new and dangerous experience that made him feel a little unreal. As Duque's thoughts stopped, Khadgar found that his senses had returned to normal. He panted heavily. This was a habit of his. Spirit bodies did not need to breathe. Khadgar began to carefully distinguish between what was real and what was not. Duque did not say anything, nor did he try to remind or force Khadgar to do anything. In Duque's imagination, not many people would be able to withstand such an impact. In particular, the psychological difference was too great. How many people would be able to withstand suddenly knowing that they could actually be amazing after living such a terrible life for 20 years? From Duque's perspective, this was like opening Pandora's box. It could release many terrifying things, such as the most negative emotions. But don't forget that the final item in Pandora's box was hope. Therefore, Duque wanted to take a gamble no matter what. He wanted to see if Khadgar, the most powerful great mage in history, lived up to his reputation. It had nothing to do with one's ability to comprehend magic. There were too many talented people in this world, but how many of them could become successful in the end? Apart from talent, success depended more on willpower. Khadgar's willpower had always been strong. Hoo. Khadgar panted heavily. Can I see it again? In fact, can I see my future self in that world? Sure, Duque replied calmly as he once again sent over the image created by the system elf. Khadgar closed his eyes and slowly relaxed his senses, allowing the large number of images that invaded his sea of consciousness to gradually calm down, until it became as smooth as watching a movie. Scene after scene flashed before his eyes. Khadgar was once again immersed in that virtual, me from another world. In that real illusory world, he opened his eyes and took a deep breath. Now, he was standing in a memory that belonged only to him. He was standing in a small world with himself as the center. His body was surging with the energy of that world, and what he felt was something that he could not have felt in his 20 years as a soul. This was very fresh and very heavy, and it allowed him to see things that he could not have seen before. That's right. In that world, he was the hero. He was the leader. At the same time, he had to bear many things that he did not need to bear in the main storyline world. Choice. Almost every choice of a high-ranking person was accompanied by pain and sacrifice. There was nothing that could be achieved without paying a price, and there was no war that did not involve death. In this world, he had been a miserable low-ranked mage when he was alive. After choosing to preserve his soul, he only needed to fulfill his duty as a steward. He could push all the dangers to Duque and be his own librarian, roaming in the sea of books and immersing himself in magic experiments. In that parallel world, he was the most important magic consultant of the Alliance, as well as an important leader of the Alliance. Every speculation and decision regarding the realm of mystery was incomparably heavy. It had to be said that Khadgar's heart was in a mess, and he was even feeling bitter. But at this time, Khadgar saw something else. It was something that Duque had intentionally or unintentionally let him see. Sometimes, without comparison, there would be no harm. Khadgar saw that under Duque's leadership, the first and second dark portal ended in 2 years. In his own world, it had taken 6 years. In this world, Duque had vigorously developed technology and economy, turning the tide many times. In the field of conventional warfare, the Alliance had almost completely suppressed the enemy. On his side, the Lordaeron kingdom had been destroyed, and there was also Alterac, Rapids Castle, Kuel Salis. Almost all of Lordaeron had been destroyed. Then, Gloom City had risen, and the Sin Dorii kingdom had sided with the Horde. Only when they were placed side by side could Khadgar truly understand just how great the difference between the two worlds was. Khadgar was in a mess, and his mind seemed to have turned to mush. He did not realize that while his thoughts were in chaos, the other 5 elemental emissaries were watching in shock as Khadgar's soul strength increased exponentially. This is... Thaddeus' face was filled with disbelief. Only a soul that has been tested is the strongest soul. Alonso sighed. Duque did not disturb Khadgar. Duque was throwing caution to the wind, completely throwing caution to the wind. He really did not know how telling Khadgar the truth would affect this steward of Karazhan, who had loyally watched over him for 22 years. He could only gamble. Huff, huff, huff. Khadgar's breathing became rapid. Finally, after 2 minutes, he seemed to have calmed down. Duque asked in a low voice, Khadgar, is it a pity? Is it resentment? Perhaps the original you could have done better. Khadgar raised his head and smiled. As expected, the work of a bronze dragon is difficult for humans to accept. When I saw how valiant I was in the other world, I was a bit confused as to which one was the real me. Duque said, have you thought it through? I have. The me in this world is me, and the me in the other world is also me. Since the me in the other world can do it, I think I can do it well in my own world. At this point, Khadgar revealed a mysterious smile. I know what you are worried about, my lord. I want to say that your worries are unnecessary. Unnecessary? Just like how you had countless chances to become the emperor, but you gave up on it. My reason is similar. The world is about to be destroyed by demons, so I don't care who is going to be the hero. Chapter 1300. Duque was at a loss for words. As expected, different people had different ways of thinking. In essence, Duque was selfish. In his heart, he always had a priority list. First, he had to protect himself, then his harem, then his friends and family. On this basis, Duque did not mind being a hero and saving his country and the world. But a true hero would first be the world, then the country, and finally the individual. No one was born great, but those with noble bloodlines could also fall into the deepest darkness. No matter what kind of education or circumstances a person received to have such a grand idea and then put it into action, they should be praised and praised. Yes. Even if the sky collapsed, the tall one would hold it up. If no one was willing to be the tall hero, then when the sky finally collapsed, the short one would not be able to survive either. Everyone understood this logic, but how many could actually do it? Obviously, Khadgar was one of them. In this life, Duque seemed to have absorbed Khadgar's fate, shouldering many responsibilities that should have been Khadgar's, completing even greater feats than Khadgar himself. From the bottom of his heart, Duque still felt a little guilty. The human heart was very complicated. It was true that Duque could continue to cheat others and trick Khadgar into becoming his magic battery after he improved himself. But what about in the future? Thus, before things got worse, Duque used the parallel world method to improve Khadgar, which was actually a way to save his own soul. Unexpectedly, Khadgar laughed and said, "The world is about to be destroyed by demons, I don't care who's going to be the hero." These words seemed crude, but were actually filled with philosophy. Duque's heart was relieved. So this is the so-called gauging the heart of a gentleman with one's own yardstick. Suddenly, he laughed bitterly. Speaking of which, this method of infusing illusions was actually displaying different fates and tempering other people's souls, and it was really effective. Let alone Duque, even the other 5 elemental emissaries could feel the strength of Khadgar's soul. To be honest, before this, Dark Witch Farina had looked down on Khadgar. She could not imagine why Duque would choose such a weak soul to be the core of his 6 elements. Who would have thought that a miracle that seemed to happen frequently but was actually impossible to replicate had happened? Originally, Khadgar's soul power was the lowest among the 6 elemental emissaries, but he had quickly become the strongest among them. This made Farina extremely envious. She stepped out of the ranks, bowed slightly, and placed her right hand on her left chest. However, her fair arm was sandwiched between 2 Mount Hygel, which made her look more alluring. "My lord. What I did to Khadgar just now, can I try it on me as well? If the elemental emissary is powerful, won't you benefit even more, my lord?" Duque glanced at her. Of course he knew what she was thinking. Duque didn't get angry and said, Khadgar saw his own fate in a different timeline, but the things he experienced, the choices he made, the pressure he endured, and Khadgar's indomitable will were the key to his growth. "Are you sure you want to see it too?" "I'm sure," Farina said with a look of great loyalty. Duque didn't waste any more time and directly connected with his mind. Then, how could the evil Black Witch be treated the same as the good young Khadgar? The miserable Farina saw many scenes, most of which were fabricated by Duque using the system ELF. In the past, in order to farm for equipment in the game, Duque had led his team to Naxxramas over and over again. Thus, Duque simply made a 3D image of Farina's memories in the game and showed it to Farina. Yes, Khadgar was indomitable, while Farina was beaten like a boss in the game, over and over again. How could it be the same? In the image of fate, the first half was mostly Farina's memories, but the end of every fate was death. It wasn't that she didn't try to resist, but no matter what method she used to improve herself, she was still defeated in the end. Thousands of reincarnations in the illusory world only lasted a few seconds in reality. Soon, Farina returned from the fate with a pale face. "Yo! Farina, it seems that you still can't be indomitable." Duque comforted Farina hypocritically. Sob sob sob. As expected, submitting to my lord is my only chance to break free from my fate. My lord, you are my final salvation. If there weren't so many people watching, Farina would definitely cry and shout as she hugged Duque's thigh, begging for forgiveness. Yes, Farina's loyalty plus 10. After dealing with all the elemental emissaries, Duque finally heaved a sigh of relief. Sensing Khadgar's soul undulations, which were as powerful as a raging river, Duque secretly made an assessment, breaking dawn. That's it. Only this Khadgar could truly help Duque. Duque returned to the throne of arcane energy, sat upright, and slightly raised his head. I hereby announce that in 3 days, I will officially break through to the demigod realm. All the preparations were completed. Before breaking through to the demigod realm, Duque contacted his lovers for the last time. He knew that Tyrande was currently planning to uproot the insect nests in Silithus. Clipping off Thun's wings was something that could not be rushed. At the same time, it was to buy time for Duque. You must come back. I know you are very confident, but you must be careful and prioritize your own safety. I'll wait for you. The magic communication was filled with blessings, as well as a hint of sadness. Regardless of which lover it was, they all knew that this was Duque's path. Although no one knew where Duque's magical path would end, as long as Duque himself decided to stop, as Duque's lovers and most loyal supporters, they had no reason to hold him back. Don't worry. I will succeed. Duque's calm smile revealed his strong confidence. 3 days was not a long time, and it passed very quickly. The experts loyal to Duque had already entered Karazhan. On the first floor were the guardian knights of Duke Marcus's family, and then Edwin Van Cleef was in charge. In addition, the 2 maids Vanessa and Solarian were also in charge. Duque was at the highest floor of Karazhan, and he had begun to go all out. In an independent space the size of 2 football fields, the ground was covered with magic formations with complicated patterns. These magic formations used the most primitive magic runes of Azeroth, draconic runes. They had many functions such as defending against enemies, communicating with the elemental realm, and so on. All the preparations had been done to the limit that Duque could do. Outside the magic formation, the 6 elemental emissaries were ready. Duque abandoned all distracting thoughts and let out a long breath. Let's begin. Chapter 1301. Becoming a wizard was a step-by-step process of training. If Earth and Sky wizards were purely communicating with heaven and earth and grasped the power to influence the world, then Morning Star, Radiant Moon and Breaking Dawn would further introduce magic from the elemental world, refining their own power and producing something similar to a nuclear reactor, producing magic in a form that was almost perpetual. Once they advanced further, they would be able to communicate with the entire world with power that surpassed the mortal realm. Demigods were existences that had stepped into the realm of gods. After reading through a large number of ancient books, Duque knew that demigods in Azeroth were not simply demigods who had divinity and used it. With divinity, they could only be regarded as pure divine beings, just like the 6 elemental emissaries that Duque had modified. True demigods would forever be a part of Azeroth. Unless they were completely destroyed at their roots, demigods could theoretically be resurrected infinitely. For example, Cenarius' father, the strongest demigod, White Deer Malorn, had been dead for 10,000 years. Who knew that his corpse would come back to scare people? Oh, no, to fight against evil. Duque stood in the middle of the magic formation with a hexagram as its shape. He calmed down and even paused the system elf's assistance, using the power of a wizard to feel the world. Silence. Silence. Complete and utter silence. He closed his eyes and turned off his vision, even using magic to prevent any light from entering his eyes through his eyelids. He used a small amount of magic to turn off his hearing, unable to hear anything from the outside world. 2 thin layers of arcane elemental isolation appeared in his nostrils, filtering out all smells. In the sea of consciousness, he isolated his tongue's sense of taste. Finally, his entire soul was pulled out of his body under the effect of the magic formation. It was a very mysterious feeling. His body was clearly below him, but he was floating in the air. Instead of looking back at his body like a curious baby, Duque let go of his spiritual touch. It extended out from the room. The next second, he felt all the sensations in Karazhan, the sound of the wind echoing in the corridor, the spiritual energy undulations of the patrolling Einherjar, the flow of air through the tiny cracks in the walls. In the next second, his spirit sense spread to the entire upwind trail, and he sensed the vitality hidden under the charred ground. In the third second, Duque's senses had spread to the entire planet Azeroth. Although the feedback was very vague and there were many uncertainties, Duque was very sure that he could already feel the world's breathing, pulse, the cycle of life, and the world's pain. The closest pain came from the southeast, where the cursed land was located. The door of darkness was like a wound left behind by a sharp weapon. Not only was it unable to heal, it was also like an abscess that caused the world to bleed in pain. In the far northwest was Mount Hyjal. The destruction of the Holy Mountain and the World Tree had undoubtedly left a deep scar on this land. The more recent pain came from the far west, and Duque instinctively sensed that it was Silithus. The ancient god Thun was overdrawing the power of the earth to create its insect servants almost infinitely. However, after the pain, Azeroth's immune system seemed to have been stimulated, or it could be said that Azeroth, which had the consciousness of the cycle of life, finally produced the most intense stress response. That's right. Mother Earth was awakening, and in her unique way, she was protecting herself and every life on this planet. Duque could clearly feel that the shackles of the upper limit of life had been unlocked by Azeroth, and the upper limit of the world's power for the mortal guardians was also rising. Since the Door of Darkness, Duque had regarded himself as the guardian of the world, and he had earnestly fulfilled his obligations as a guardian. At the same time, Duque felt the favor of the goddess of fate, and after Thun came out to cause trouble, he quickly obtained a few portions of divinity. Although Duque wanted to attribute all the success to his own efforts, Duque's subconscious was very clear that everything was not a coincidence. Some people were born with divine strength. Some people were born with wisdom. And some people were often accompanied by luck. However, in the mortal world, fate was ever-changing. The fate of millions of people was like duckweed, surging with the waves, unable to control themselves. Even so, the ones who succeeded in the end were the combination of talent, hard work, and luck, and the true king who grew up after experiencing countless tribulations. So today, at the beginning of the opening of the world's authority, Duque wanted to be the first person to eat crabs. When his soul began to sing and began to call the whole world. Almost immediately, the world responded to Duque. With the appearance of the purple-blue pillar of light at the top of Karazhan's tower, the entire Eastern Kingdom continent, and even the entire world of Azeroth, all professionals and transcendents felt an inexplicable throbbing in their hearts. Every powerful existence, one by one, turned their heads and looked in the direction of Karazhan, following the direction of the throbbing in their hearts. The world in front of them seemed to have stopped at this moment. The wind was still, and the leaves were hanging quietly. The sand in the air maintained its tumbling posture. Even in the Silithus worm nest, the flying and spinning broken limbs stopped spinning in the air. The light of dawn penetrated the thick clouds and poured down on the earth without any scruples. The whole world was quiet and quiet. Everything in the world fell into silence, as if everything had completely calmed down, bowing its head and making way for the scene that was about to happen. In the center of the endless sea, the big whirlpool that used to be the well of eternity seemed to have changed for no reason. The center of the whirlpool, which was originally spinning clockwise, as if it wanted to suck all the seawater in the world into the other world, suddenly stopped. There was not a single ripple on the surface of the sea, like a mirror, reflecting the color of the sky. Unknowingly, Duque opened his eyes, and in his pupils, there was the same whirlpool-like arcane light as in the original endless sea. This time was very short, less than 1/10 of a second, and then his pupils became clear again. Even though it was very short, Khadgar was still sharp enough to capture this detail. Khadgar's clear voice was perfectly connected, and the resonance of the soul was immediately produced. In the name of the Wanderer of the Stars, the Seeker of Knowledge, and the Supreme Ruler of Arcane Magic, I declare to the world, my lord, Duke Marcus, is the master of arcane magic. At this moment, all the mages in the world felt that the magic power in their bodies had begun to slightly deviate. The core of their magic power was leaving them in fear. Chapter 1302. The Lord of the Arcane, it meant that a brand new existence had declared its dominion over arcane power in the name of the world to all mages who used arcane spells in the world. Although this dominion was not complete or absolute, and as long as one carefully sensed it, they would realize that this dominion excluded the dragons. However, being controlled by others was never something that made Pharaoh happy. For example, if a true god who controlled a certain domain wanted to use magic in that domain, he had to use it in the name of that existence and follow its rules. The goddess of the moon Elun was an example. To use any magic related to the moon, the incantation had to be preceded by the words, in the name of the goddess of the moon Elun. Usually, one had to offer sacrifices to the goddess of Elun, such as overflowing magic or faith, and use the incantation at the critical moment. Only then would the goddess of the moon care about you. In a domain that was monopolized, it was unreasonable. If you lowered your head, there would be a deal. If you were unhappy, then you could only scram and not use this power. Of course, the one who made the declaration was only a demigod, and his dominion over that domain was not complete. At this time, one had to make a choice. If they were really unhappy, they could add something like free arcane magic in front of the incantation to announce that they were using unowned magic. However, if that demigod became a true god in the future, the person who used unowned magic back then would be recorded in a little black book. Then, when he became a god, he would come back to settle the score. Burning that part of your magic circuit was a small matter, but what was worse was that your children and grandchildren would be forbidden from using it. That would be a big problem. Moreover, the one who had announced to become the Lord of the Arcane was Duke Marcus. Countless mages' expressions changed drastically, especially Anastrian from Cuel Salus, who was now the leader of the Forgotten Ones. He gripped his staff tightly with his bony claws that were so dry that there was not a trace of moisture in them. This feeling was like Duque had slapped him in the face. One slap on the left, one slap on the right. Then, it repeated endlessly. She was so close to slapping out a few of his white teeth. The only good thing was that Duque had only just begun to try to become a demigod. First, he might not succeed. Second, he was still miles away from becoming a true god. Unfortunately, he was still unhappy. It was clearly his own power, but in his own soul, in his own magic circuit, the wandering arcana energy was being extracted. The arcana energy that was branded with Duque name was forcefully descending. Its unstoppable power was taking over and changing everything. Not every wizard was named Anastrian, and not every wizard had crossed the threshold of Radiant Moon. From this moment onwards, all wizards below the Radiant Moon realm had to quickly recite the words in the name of Duke Marcus before using any arcane magic. Otherwise, they would have to wait for some great power to develop new arcana spells so that they could bypass Duque's arcana rule. Only then could they use arcana spells again. In the Dalajan, in the Sin Dorii Kingdom, in the Eastern Kingdom, and in Kalimdor, every spellcaster subconsciously raised their heads to look at the sky. They discovered that the ever-changing arcane energy was constantly gathering and scattering in the sky, forming strange and blurry scenes. Mediocre people could only watch the show. Capable people looked at what Duque had shown them after swearing his oath as the Lord of Arcana. It was a brand new arcana secret. I, Khadgar, in the name of Duke Marcus Elemental Emissary, hereby declare that the subtleties of arcana should be known by the world and understood by the world. The power of arcana should be concentrated in the hands of the good, the explorers of magic, and the devout. My Lord wishes to accomplish all good deeds in the world. My Lord wishes to destroy all evil deeds in the world. Those who are willing to follow this will and this righteousness, please walk with my Lord. Khadgar's soul declaration was transmitted through the world will, and all the mages in the world were in an uproar. If Duque had just tyrannically declared his power, then this was a classic example of enticing and expressing his stance. These words had two meanings. The first was that there would be rewards for those who believed in him. These rewards were the metamagic abilities, arcane subtlety, and arcane concentration, that the mages themselves had to comprehend. As for the former, arcane subtlety, any decent mage would have to figure out a way to learn it on their own. This was because it could reduce your target's magic resistance by 10 points and reduce the threat of your arcane spells by 40%. There were always people with thick skin in this world. For example, the warriors of the Blackrock tribe were born with high fire resistance. 10 points of resistance was a unit that could reduce the enemy's resistance by a considerable amount. And the threat was to make the enemy more wary of you. For example, if you cut the enemy's arm after they had been anesthetized, they wouldn't feel any pain and wouldn't feel like you were hitting them. Arcane concentration was to further reduce the enemy's resistance to your arcana magic. These two metamagic abilities were very painful even for high-ranked mages. If they rejected Duque, it would mean that they would have to say goodbye to these two metamagic abilities forever. The second meaning was even more direct. Damn it, I'm on the side of justice and kindness. Those who are neutral are fine, but those who are evil can all get out of here. Almost as soon as these words came out, the entire Dalajan was in an uproar. Long live! Praise be to Duke Marcus! In any world, power was in the shape of a pyramid, and those with ultimate power were always in the minority. Most of them were ordinary people at the bottom. Duque's announcement meant that almost every decent mage, as long as they weren't evil cultists, would automatically have two metamagic abilities. For a large group of mages, this was a huge increase in power, or at least 20%. Almost at the same time that Khadgar made the announcement on behalf of Duque, more information regarding arcana magic was transmitted to the souls of the mages, such as the standard of using arcana magic, and that the starting point for exploring arcana magic was to be a Morning Star mage. Every spellcaster could feel Duque's strictness, as well as his demand for mastery of arcana magic. Duque, who was in the middle of the spell formation, did not say a word. He subconsciously lowered his head, and found that beneath his feet was no longer a spell formation, nor was it earth, nor was it mountains and rivers. Instead, it was a world of nothingness, with only arcana elements left. This world still had the outline of planet Azeroth. He could even transcend matter and space, and directly see the souls on the other side of the planet, on the Kalimdor continent. Souls of all colors. Although there were countless souls fleeing from this illusory world of arcana magic, some of them were spinning strangely, some were trembling, and some were even desperately trying to break away from this world of arcana magic. Duque sensed that they were things that had begun to decay. Calamity Army. The Forgotten. The corner of Duque's mouth lifted into a mysterious smile. Chapter 1303. The complicated prayers lasted for an hour. Duque was also a little helpless. There was nothing he could do about it. This was because the arcane technique was the core of a mage, and it was also the core of his breakthrough to the demigod realm. Simply crossing the threshold of a demigod wasn't that complicated. If he didn't want to improve, he could just say that he was the guardian of XXX. For example, the wild boar demigod Agamagan, who was killed by two third-rate void dukes. Although he was said to have transformed into the Razor Highland that protected the boars and the boar people after his death, Duque still felt that he was useless. Duque had ambitions and dreams. Otherwise, he would not step into the god domain and just go with the flow like a commoner. Since he wanted to destroy the Burning Legion and break through to the divine realm, then he had to aim for the position of true god. Therefore, from the very beginning, Duque had chosen a broader and more powerful domain as the core strength for his breakthrough into the demigod realm. Duque's announcement to the souls of the entire world made Jaina and Alucia very happy, because from this moment on, they could use other methods to quickly and accurately find out about their lover's condition. Of course, no one knew if those who offended Jaina would have their magic banned after she gave them pillow talk. Just when the pharaoh of the world thought that Duque would be lucky enough to become an arcana god, the pharaoh of the world, in Karazhan, the second elemental emissary stepped out. The manager, Majordomo Executus, was a fire demon. This was because the pharaoh were currently experiencing the soul connection from the world. Whether they wanted to or not, they had to pay attention to it. If Khadgar, who was the first to run out, could be said to have won the hearts of most of the pharaoh races, then Majordomo Executus who had just run out had truly shocked many pharaoh races. Damn, a fire demon had come out. What the hell was this? After all, not every pharaoh knew that Duque was so awesome that he accepted a fire demon as his underling. There was no doubt that Majordomo Executus affected the appearance of the city. He looked weak, but his strength was actually at the level of a boss. The special characteristics of the fire demon made it very difficult to defeat or even kill him with the support of the fire element. He raised his arms high, and the horn-like spikes on the outside of his arms and on his back made a cracking sound when he raised his hands. Every pharaoh in the world noticed that they were hallucinating on their retinas. Countless tiny flames were circling around them, even floating up and flying into the sky. Majordomo Executus' slightly strange accent echoed in the hearts of the pharaoh. I, the fire demon Executus, in the name of my lord, the conqueror of the molten core, the slayer of the fire demon King Ragnaros, and the supreme ruler of the land of fire, declare to the world that my lord is the lord of fire. Almost as soon as Majordomo finished his soul declaration, the entire magic world, and even the entire fire elemental world experienced a magnitude 12 earthquake. Since ancient times, the four elemental realms had always been in the hands of the four elemental lords. Their dominance over the four elements could be traced back to the War of the Sovereigns 25,000 years ago. Before that, there were no written records of the world. Therefore, Duque's declaration that he was the Lord of Fire was no longer a slap in the face, but a complete declaration of war. As the saying went, cutting off one's path to wealth was like killing one's parents. By doing this, Duque had undoubtedly abused all of Ragnaros's ancestors. Although Lager probably had no ancestors to say, anyway, Duque didn't care. Facing the extremely violent and furious Ragnaros, Duque had already destroyed one of his most important clones. According to the original history, in the future, in the land of fire in Lager's lair, the mortal heroes would definitely fight with Lager. Offending him once was offending him n times was also offending him. Since he had offended Ragnaros to death, Duque wouldn't give Ragnaros any face and directly announced that he was the Lord of Fire. If Duque's declaration to all the pharaoh in the world that he was the Lord of Arcane Magic was slightly overbearing, then it was undeniably domineering now. Almost immediately, Ragnaros, who had been forced to sleep due to being injured again, was forced to wake up. After confirming the soul transmission again, Lager was extremely furious. Duke Marcus, you despicable person who colluded with a traitor to destroy my clones and my holy land. I won't spare you. Just you wait, I swear, I will burn you and this damn world to ashes. At this moment, almost every mage could feel the terrifying waves of anger coming from the fire elemental realm. However, the reaction of the pharaoh was, ha 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 ha. Good. Well done, His Excellency Duke Marcus is mighty and domineering. Almost every mage cheered and jumped for joy. It was simple. Compared to the ownerless arcane elements, the more primitive fire element basically had a master, and its master was the elemental demigod Ragnaros. Of course, this guy wasn't a good person. He had always occupied the fire element and forbade anything other than fire elemental beings from using it. However, when he fought against the Titans in the War of Domination, he was viciously defeated. In the end, he was greatly injured and imprisoned in the elemental plane, losing his absolute control over the fire element. This was why mortal mages had the opportunity to use the fire element. Of course, in order to avoid Lager's Lord, the mages had no choice but to choose spells that consumed more magic power. Duque had complained countless times in the past, playing with fire spells really consumes a lot of magic power. Now that Duque was fighting Ragnaros for control over the fire element, no matter what the result was, at least he could vent his anger. Moreover, Duque was now making a big deal out of it. With a wave of his hand, he announced that as long as he succeeded in becoming a demigod, the magic power consumption of all fire spells would be reduced by 20%. This time, every mage was so excited that they cried out in joy. Ah! I can't! Lord Duke Marcus, please succeed in becoming a demigod. Please become the god of mages. All of the Dalajan, and even all of the pharaoh's compatriots in the magic world were in an uproar. With the ecstasy of the fire element and the elemental emissary of the ice element, the ice dragon Sapphiron appeared. The prayer changed. I am Sapphiron. In the name of my lord, Duke Marcus, I declare that my lord is the incarnation of frost, the transcender of absolute zero, the blizzard that freezes all evil. This time, it sounded very famous. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that Duque's demand for the frost domain was relatively low. It was just enough for him to use. Others were puzzled by this. Why was Duque so domineering towards other domains, but so uninterested in the frost domain? Jaina was the only one who burst into tears. Sparkling tears streamed down her exquisite face. She knew that it wasn't that Duque didn't have the courage to do it, but that the god of ice element was left for her to break through. Chapter 1304. Duque announced that his divine realm involved 3 elements. In the eyes of outsiders, Duque definitely wanted to become the god of mages. It was natural for the strongest archmage to want to break through the limits and become the god of mages. No one was surprised. Just like when Medivh borrowed the magic of the Tirisful Parliament to break through to the demigod realm, he chose the space magic that he was best at. That was why Medivh was an interstellar wanderer. Before this, only mages were affected. Because it was a time of war, many pharaoh had priests around him. Regarding this grand occasion, the priests held an indifferent attitude and came to watch the show. At most, they carefully savored the special elemental aura around the mages. Soon, they found something strange. The air was filled with the familiar holiness of the priests and holy knights. It was as if they were in the Holy Church of Stratholme, or the Lights Hope Chapel in the Eastern Plaguelands. The holy statues of the sages stood in the middle of it, gazing at everyone with eyes that seemed to transcend time and space. Wait! Don't tell me Lord Duke Marcus wants to dabble in the holy light too. They guessed right. The next person who appeared shocked all the priests and made them lose the ability to speak. This was because in their spiritual vision, they saw the former Archbishop of Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. Holy Light above, Lord Fail has been resurrected. No. Look at his body, it's translucent. Is that a Holy Spirit? It should be. In the elemental domain, most priests were amusing idiots with little knowledge. They would never guess that Alonso's was now a light elemental creature. I, Alonso's Fail, accept the request of my friend Duke Marcus to be his envoy of holy light. In the name of my friend, I swear that my friend is the preacher of holy light, the guardian of truth and justice. My friend will spread the three great virtues and dispel all evil in the world. From the perspective of the origin of the world, this announcement was not the most powerful one. But from the perspective of the mortal world, this announcement caused the most shock. In the church square of Stormwind City, the commoners who gathered to pray every day saw the entire church of holy light emitting dazzling golden light that pierced the clouds. In the distance, people seemed to hear countless little angels singing happily. In the church, every monk, priest, and holy knight saw it with their own eyes. The statue of the sage was actually trembling slightly. The holy light surging on the statue was like the ripples set off by the wind blowing on the surface of the water, one after another, shaking non-stop. Holy light above. Praise you, Duke Marcus, sure enough, your name will become sacred. Duke Marcus, your name will indeed become holy. If Dukla's appearance of Alonso's Fail could be said to be shocking, then the appearance of Dark Witch Farina would cause the warlocks to be burnt to a crisp. Although Farina had tried her best to wear a dignified gown, she had played the honey trap for so long. Her coquettish charm had already seeped into every corner of her soul. Therefore, her every move seemed so charming. Even her declaration seemed to be an invitation. I am Farina, the Black Witch. I have answered the call of my lord, and I hereby announce to the world that my lord is the Blade of Darkness. He does not use the power of darkness, but does things of light. After Farina, it was Thaddeus' turn to make a similar announcement. However, after the initial shock, his existence seemed to be dispensable. Only the druids and shamans, who were closest to nature and used the power of wind and lightning, heard Thaddeus' announcement. They were extremely embarrassed. Damn it, you're a mage, yet you've already dabbled in the power of wind and lightning. Then what are we, the true envoys of nature, supposed to do? What was interesting was that Sal had heard it too. The tribal chief had a constipated expression on his face. The world-class announcement of the 6 elemental emissaries was indeed shocking. Duque knew very well that this was just an appetizer. It could even be a stepping stone for a mortal to step into the god realm. One could only rely on themselves to pass the trial. Countless extraordinary beings in the world had their eyes on the outside of Karazhan. Even though Karazhan's perfect protection blocked these gazes from directly peeping inside, Duque could still clearly feel all this. Some were kind, curious, malicious, prying, and there were also those who were ready to watch a joke. Although Duque used arcane, fire, and ice as his foundation, and the other 3 as supplements, it seemed clear at first glance that he had a wide range of powers and a promising future. Only the extraordinary knew that the difficulty for Duque to step into the god realm was already dozens of times higher than that of ordinary weak demigods. Considering that Duque was going to fight Ragnaros, the king of fire demons, in the end, the increase in difficulty caused by the difficulty of invisibility was immeasurable. What the outside world thought and did was the outside world's business. Even though outside the magic array, his 6 elemental emissaries were constantly chanting prayers, Duque was completely unaware of it. He calmed down, completely calming down. At the same time, he slowly opened the system genie. With the help of the system, he adjusted every cell in his body, striving to make the compatibility between his body and soul infinitely close to 100%. The magic hidden in his blood began to flow with the pulse of his heart, pouring into every corner of his body. In the magic circuit, with the arcane circuit as the core, ice and fire as supplements, holy, shadow, and thunder as secondary, it began to carry out an orderly self-cycle, spreading the benefits. Ba thump. Ba thump. The beating of the heart and the pulsation of the magic circuit turned into a sound. The sound became louder and louder, like the beating of a drum, resounding through the highest levels of Karazhan. At this time, Duque's appearance had completely changed. It looked like Duque, except that his outline was still Duque. He no longer looked like a human with a physical body. The energy of the 6 major elements appeared on the surface of Duque's body, forming countless curved lines. These thin lines were like hundreds of thousands of spider webs, densely covering the surface of Duque's skin. In the surrounding void, countless elemental energy was attracted over, and after being filtered by the magic array, it became extremely pure energy, shooting towards the surface of Duque's body and quickly penetrating his whole body. At first, there was only a faint glow under Duque's skin, but then the faint glow that emerged became more and more intense, and then became even more dazzling. His whole body seemed to have become a complete elemental body. That was only on the surface, and in fact, the transformation was not yet complete. Duque carefully controlled the balance of elemental energy in his body through the system. Even with the help of the system, this was still a task that required great care. Dancing on the edge of a blade could not describe the difficulty of this task. Chapter 1305. If he had to use a word to describe it, it would be like driving a sports car at 300 km per hour on a bad road where a few pieces of gravel could jump out at any time, with one hand on the steering wheel and the other out of the window, and then, in an instant, complete the standard sense of threading a needle. This was not something that could be done after showing off and running away. If he was not careful, not only would he explode in minutes, even Karazhan, and even half of the Elven Forest and Twilight Forest would suffer. Duque clenched his teeth, and then, like embroidery on a grain of rice, he carefully controlled the system elf to further purify the seemingly pure elements that had been absorbed into his body. With arcane spells as the foundation, flames and frost as the branches, and holy, shadow, and thunder as the support, he separated the impurities from his body at high speed while further fusing the magic. He carefully compressed them, wrapped them with his consciousness, and directed them to where they needed to go under his spiritual guidance. At the same time, every drop of magic was branded with Duque's soul. It was a very fast process. Even though there were tens of thousands of pores all over his body that were filled with magic, Duque, with the help of the system elf, seemed to have divided his soul into tens of thousands of parts, and each part was doing its own job: filtration, purification, sublimation. His soul was in great pain. The pain that exceeded the limits of the physical body was not something that could be suppressed by any type of anesthetic. Because in a sense, Duque was giving up his human body and was transitioning into a spiritual body that was close to an elemental body. Very painful. Very painful. Heart-wrenching pain. So painful that his skin was cracking inch by inch. The feeling of being torn into millions of pieces and then ground into powder almost made Duque collapse. But when the pain reached its peak, all of a sudden, it disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was a sublimation. His whole soul was light, and under his feet, there seemed to be a colorful blurry world that was opening a door that belonged only to him, Duque. Come. Welcome, our new companion. A misty neutral voice said in the common language. The 6 elements stood in a 6-pointed star position, floating behind Duque. His soul slowly descended, and the next moment, Duque felt as if a certain unimportant memory of his was being asked if he could read it. Duque subconsciously agreed. Then, a majestic palace appeared in front of him. It was a Gothic palace, somewhat similar to Notre Dame de Paris, an epoch-making landmark in the history of European architecture on Earth. The first thing that came into view was the towering spire that pierced through the clouds. The facade had a unique style, and the structure was rigorous. It looked very majestic and solemn. It is divided longitudinally by pilasters into 3 blocks, and horizontally by 3 bands of ornamentation, of which, at the bottom, there are 3 recessed doorways. Above the doorway was the so-called demigod corridor. On it were statues representing the forest god Cenarius, the white deer god Malorn, and many others. Higher up was the corridor of the true god. There were clearly 6 statues, but the only ones that Duque could distinguish were the moon goddess Elun and sea Thun. The rest were all blurry. The huge and luxurious door opened with a loud bang. Duque strode in. The scene in front of him made Duque a little stunned. The inside was more like a semicircular theater, and the position at the front was obviously for the true god. As a newly ascended demigod, Duque could only be at the outermost circle. Duque didn't mind. Following the guidance of his soul, he found an empty position. He wasn't surprised that such a large temple was empty, because he saw a huge illusory existence next to his position. It was an existence that seemed both real and fake, as if it was pretending to sleep, but it also seemed like it was really sleeping. Even in this life, Duque didn't directly come into contact with it, but he could still recognize it from its green appearance. It was the demigod Cenarius, who should have been killed by Grandpa Roar. Duque frowned slightly. He walked around the huge Cenarius, and when he came to his position, an elemental throne with 6 colors rose naturally and lifted Duque's body onto the throne. At the same time, Duque saw his name in a daze. It was like a pen sticker used by primary school students. It was an empty name with only a hook and no meaning. It floated not far from Duque's chest. Duque pointed his finger, and the 6 elements automatically condensed on his finger according to the proportion. Duque used his finger as a pen and wrote his name in a flamboyant manner. The illusory frame absorbed Duque's name like soil absorbing rainwater. In his spiritual vision, Duque could feel the magic power in his body disappearing at the speed of a river. At the same time, with the magic power stirring, it seemed to have become a chaotic mass with 6 colors in his spiritual sea. It was very unclear. Gradually, slowly, Duque could tell that it was the divinity he had absorbed into his body. Under the washing of the high-purity magic power, the 6 types of divinity merged into one and bloomed with the light of life. The chaos was constantly washed away, and the divinity in his perception became clearer. The mark of the previous owner and the divinity separated at this time and attached a new soul name. Blue arcane magic. Red flames. White frost. Golden holiness. Black shadows. Purple thunder. The 6 colors blended and quickly formed a rainbow. Following the movements of Duque's hands, it was shaped and fixed in Duque's soul. This was Duque engraving his name in the core of the world. It was also Duque shaping his demigod soul, a super strong soul that was far superior to ordinary souls. Duque's magic power and soul power continued to be consumed at a high speed at this time. If it was an ordinary demigod who did not have enough accumulation, they might run out of power and then be destroyed on the way to becoming a demigod. But Duque was not an ordinary demigod. Since he had chosen a more complex divinity structure, he also had a wider source of divine power. He could even clearly feel that on the 2 continents of the Eastern Kingdom and Kalimdor, countless mages, priests, druids, and shamans were supporting him faintly, using their overflowing magic to quietly replenish Duque's consumption. Similarly, in the fire elemental world and the water elemental world, there was also a good amount of magic replenishment. Of course, as the core arcane magic, Duque could only rely on Karazhan's reserves. That was the overflowing energy from the void and other spaces that Karazhan had accumulated for countless years. Suddenly, Duque saw a vague figure. Although it was vague, he still recognized who it was at a glance. Medivh? Chapter 1306. That's right. It was Medivh. Medivh, who was supposed to live a happy retirement after the 3rd battle of the Dark Portal, made a move at this time. It was a powerful force hidden at the bottom of Karazhan that even Duque did not perceive. Duque was a little taken aback. If old Max wanted to trick him, he could blow up his lair in minutes and he wouldn't have a place to cry. Fortunately, Duque was the inheritor who truly inherited Mediva's aspirations and legacy. Well done. But don't waste your power. The higher your starting point for becoming a demigod, the greater your chance of becoming a true god. Across the void, Mediva's voice reached the depths of Duque's soul. Yes. Duque nodded heavily. In this world, there were many extraordinary people. For example, before transmigrating, there were people who could complete 1-micron level polishing. There were people who could complete electric welding that even the most sophisticated welders could not. That was both the craftsmanship of the great nation's craftsmen and the display of the limits of the human body. With the help of the system elf, Duque's fine control of magic made it so that not a trace of magic was wasted. The magic passed through the soul shell, converged, condensed, and then refined. One could see the divinity condensing at high speed, forming the form Duque wanted. Before this, Duque, who had read countless ancient books and visited Aguin, learned that every demigod had to condense their own divinity symbol. This symbol was both the symbol of a demigod and the source of his core power. The animal-type demigod was very simple. Its symbol was himself, and at most it could strengthen a certain part. For example, the god of boars strengthened his pair of fangs. But Duque was working towards the position of the god of mages, and it would be a bit of a waste to have a human form that looked exactly like himself. The divinity symbol could be used to do more things. After thinking hard for a long time, Duque made his decision. At this moment, Duque did not hesitate. The divinity symbol began to appear. First it was a line, then countless parallel lines, and then branches intersected with each other, forming nodes, turning into a huge web. At first glance, Duque looked like a spider weaving a web. However, that was not the case. Because if someone were to observe carefully, they would discover that there was something like a broadcast tower at each node, sending out magical fluctuations. What Duque did was to cover the entire planet Azeroth with his net. With Duque's current strength, it was actually quite strenuous. Therefore, Duque avoided the important and focused on the trivial. He established the thickest network and the most powerful signal devices in every alliance or horde main city in the Eastern Kingdom and Kalimdor continent. That's right. What Duque was going to do was to build a magic internet, and every node would be a super large router that would spread his network wirelessly like a Wi-Fi signal. The weave is a good thing. More brainless operation, faster speed, and less mana consumption. The price he paid was just the free magic power that Pharaoh gave him when he wasn't using magic. Do you want to get on the weave? Sure, please enter your Wi-Fi password. Great Duque spell. Duque big magic stick. Demigod Duque great magic stick. It seemed that Duque was definitely a saint. Since ancient times, there had never been someone with such a conscience. In fact, Duque was very unscrupulous. This was like a bank helping customers save money and giving them a current interest of 1%. Then, if anyone wanted a loan, sorry, 8% would be the minimum. This was not Duque being unscrupulous. His honest and reliable little husband had explained it. Ordinary borrowing of magic power was not a problem. He could use the magic power that he saved daily. What if he needed to overdraw? The interest was higher, and it was daily interest. The consequences of not paying back money owed to the bank were very serious. In a society governed by law, the most they could do was to blacklist you and forbid you from spending too much. Duque? Sorry. Even if he died, he would have to pay the debt. If he really died, even his soul would have to work for Duque. Cough cough. At this moment, not a single pharaoh had realized how kind Duque's unscrupulous work was. When Duque spread the magic network across the 2 continents, Duque finally stepped onto the ladder of demigods. Duque's soul returned to his brand new body and slowly opened his eyes. The awakened Duque's black eyes shone with the light of new life. In the name of Duke Marcus, I announce the establishment of the magic network. The voice was not loud, but it reverberated throughout the entire magic world like thunder. The ones who heard it the most were naturally the mages, followed by the priests, and finally the warlocks, shamans, druids, and holy knights. The entire fire and water elemental world, along with the arcane energy that reverberated in the starry sky outside the Azeroth atmosphere, injected magic power into the magic network that covered the 2 continents. The trembling of the elemental sea had turned into a roar at this moment. This low and novel sound resonated thousands of times, as if it was tempting every spellcaster to try it. The first pharaoh to try the crab appeared. In the Dalajan shooting range, a Morning Star wizard shouted, "I once trained under Lord Marcus. Though he never took me in as a direct disciple, he definitely wouldn't cheat me." With that, he raised his magic staff and chanted an incantation. To be honest, those who hung out often knew each other's capabilities. The onlookers were astonished to see that the power of this fellow's pyroblast had increased by more than 30%. Originally, it could only hit a magic target halfway, but now it was sent flying. Wow! That's amazing. New things were often more difficult to implement. Duque had originally considered this point, which was why he had given such a huge discount. Who knew that while ideals were beautiful, reality was cruel? It was not that no one used it, nor was it that no one was willing to pay. It was just that too many people used it, and the mana in the magic network could not keep up. Damn, Duque cursed, hurriedly drawing in more mana from the 2 major elemental realms. The water elemental realm was still fine. The great water elemental lord, Neptulin, had died in the War of Domination and had yet to be revived. However, the boss of the fire elemental realm, Ragnaros, was still here. Even though he had been in a state of deep sleep to recover, he had long since been woken up by Duque. Faced with Duque, who had announced that he would raid his home and still had the audacity to ask for mana from his lair, Ragnaros immediately shouted in the fire elemental language. There was no need to translate those vulgar words that would lead children astray. In any case, the general gist of it was, "Uncle can bear it, Aunt can't bear it. Pfft, you Duque whatever." The fire elemental mana was stuck, and Duque almost died on the spot. As a demigod, he did not have the ability to absorb mana from the fire elemental realm. Seeing that the fire elemental mana in the weave was about to be exhausted, the unscrupulous merchant Duque made up his mind and used his ultimate move. The final explanation belongs to the master of the weave, the demigod Duke Marcus. Chapter 1307. To celebrate the opening of the weave. The first 10 spellcasters to be bound to the weave will receive a supreme gift pack. Regardless of their rank, they will enjoy a 50% discount on magic power for 10 years, and 3 additional metamagic specializations for each element. The first 100 to be bound to the weave will receive a golden gift pack, the first 1,000 to be bound to the weave will receive a silver gift pack, anyone who is bound to the weave will receive a beginner's gift pack, which can be stacked with the previous packs. Spellcasters of the Alliance will enjoy an additional 95% discount on magic power consumption. Those of Stormwind nationality will enjoy an additional 88% discount on magic power consumption. In reality, after the first 1,000, the weave's mana would basically be balanced, and Duque would not need to dig Peter to pay Paul. Not to mention those at the back, even those at the front would not necessarily be able to take advantage of Duque. It was just like how the so-called local handicrafts in Duze's previous world were all from Iwu. It would be foolish to buy them at a 50% discount, but he would still make a profit even if he gave them a 10% discount. On the surface, Duque seemed to be selling them at a huge discount. There were so many tricks that even Duque's little conscience felt apologetic. For example, an ordinary sky wizard would need 50 units of mana to cast a beginner fireball. In reality, to achieve the same effect, they did not need that much. Magic education in this era was actually very primitive. One pharaoh had found a more feasible path, and then taught it by example. A large number of people knew how to use it, and it became a classic. Coupled with the fact that Pharaoh with a bit of a brain chose the wrong talent and ran off to do all sorts of research, very few Pharaoh cared about the efficiency of basic magic and whether it could be improved. If your fireball can't kill your enemy, it's because your fireball isn't big enough, it's not fierce enough. 90% of the mentors said this. This was because the fireball would dissipate very quickly once it left the mage's control. To throw it 30 yards away and still maintain its power when it hit someone, they would only focus on gathering the fire elements and ignore the other problems. Duque was different. In the past, the Dalajan was under Antonida's control, so naturally, he had no room to interfere. After Ronan became the chairman of Kirin Tor, Duque was so busy that he had no time to care about the mages. Now that Duque was going to become the god of mages, even if he was only a demigod, he had the obligation to seduce, to correct the mistakes of those newbie mages. First, the magic model. In the past, those fellows had used messy models, and Duque looked down on them. If they wanted to use the weave, they had to use his model. If someone had the ability to remove the halo of divinity from the weave and study it carefully, they would discover that the fire magic and ice magic were filled with fluid dynamics applications. All magic shot out has experienced a similar flat nozzle contraction process, like a water gun. Next was the predetermined firing trajectory. In the past, the spells would be thrown out in a straight line, and they wouldn't care where they flew halfway. It was a good thing if he could hit it, but if he couldn't, he could only blame it on his bad luck. Accuracy was not a consideration, it was all about quantity. This was also why the mages had to form teams of mages to be more powerful. Because blindly and randomly shooting, no matter how reckless the enemy was, they would be blasted to pieces. Now, Duque paid attention to the firing trajectory of magic. Any flow of fire or ice magic was actually a process of heat change and transfer. If a little more magic was used in advance to disperse the heat or cold air between oneself and the target, then according to the laws of thermodynamics, heat could spontaneously transfer from a hot object to a cold object, but it could not spontaneously transfer from a low-temperature object to a high-temperature object. This allowed fireballs and ice arrows to follow the predetermined trajectory to attack the target. According to the knowledge that Duque had learned in university and the theory of Azeroth magic, with the final optimization by the system genie, what was obtained was the explosive, magically modified version of the weave magic. While he was busy breaking through to the demigod level, the allied army was not idle. With the support of Tyron's true Starfall, they had a plan and step-by-step to sweep Silithus clean. After using up the wreckage of the Void battleships that could be smashed down from the atmosphere, they finally completely destroyed the 3 insect nests of Ash, Leg, and Zora. Under the cover of the flying fortress Naxxramas, the allied army began to slowly advance in the direction of the ancient city of Ankh-Karaj. In the War of the Shifting Sands, it was the dragons who obtained air superiority for the Night Elves. They used their powerful breath and unstoppable strength to reap the lives of the Karaj insect people. In this life, when most of the dragons were tied up in the Void battlefield, it was the terrifying cannons of the flying fortress that cleaned up all the insect people of a large scale. The exploding Type 3 bombs easily cleared up large areas of the airspace. The high explosive bombs mercilessly plowed the ground. 1,000 years ago, the Night Elves under Fandrel's command practically braved the rain of insect corpses to advance. Today, 1,000 years later, the ones opening the way were steam tanks equipped with anti-sand filters. They used the huge engines with shovels to open a bloody path for the Allied army. Because the largest insect nest had been completely destroyed, the Allied army didn't spend much effort to reach the wall of beetles. The wall of beetles outside of Ankh-Karaj had continuously spewed out swarms of insects during the War of the Shifting Sands 1,000 years ago, almost destroying all of Kalimdor. This time, thanks to Duque letting Naxxramas fall from Ankh-Karaj and removing the other insect nests first, there weren't many insects left on the beetle platform in front of the wall of beetles. But everyone knew that in time, when the ancient god of Ankh-Karaj, Thun, regained his breath, the swarm of insects would once again rush out at an extremely high density and speed. At that time, any formation, any defense would be completely destroyed. To clean up this situation, they had to open the wall of beetles again, kill their way into Ankh-Karaj, and completely get rid of Thun. The night elf priestess Hiloma held the quicksand staff in her hand. 1,000 years ago, because Fandral Stagum's son died, the furious Fandral smashed the quicksand staff and cut off his connection with the dragons. But this time, with the united efforts of the allied army, the staff was reforged. Hiloma explained at the end, the wall of beetles must be opened again. The seal from before was already incomplete. After General Marcus smashed Naxxramas into on Kiraj, the seal was already on the verge of collapse. No need to say more, we all understand. Sar nodded. On the other side, Magni swung the Balrog hammer, looking eager to give it a try. Behind him, other than Duque and the missing Ronin and the rest, stood all the powerhouses of the Alliance, including William. A few days ago, the team led by William finally killed the evil god hacker in Zul, Europe, and then the entire team teleported over to meet up with the main army. Chapter 1308. Clang, the quicksand staff struck a huge gong, and with the deafening sound of the gong, the 10-story wall of beetles suddenly opened the largest door. The next moment, an endless swarm of beetles surged out and attacked the Allied army's formation at the city gate. It was like a huge wave crashing against a stone embankment. Even if they were prepared, all the Allied army could do here was maintain the battle line. Any attempt to advance further was impossible. It was supposed to be like this: fire the cannons, blast them. Naxxramas' new chief commander, Bulang Bronzebeard, shouted. The entire stronghold shone from bottom to top. That was the light of the cannons. For a normal warship, it was already impressive to have a 3-story cannon hold. Naxxramas had broken this limit. From bottom to top, after modifications, there were a total of 18 stories. The top and bottom 8 stories were all 155mm cannons and below. The middle 6 stories were all kinds of crazy things. Super large mortars, cannons that were originally at the level of railway guns, and even stronghold cannons. The super cannons that were originally abandoned by the dwarves because they were too difficult to transport, or because they were not very practical, were now all pulled out by Magni's orders. It was not easy to get such a big treasure like Naxxramas, and as a moving stronghold with a main city-level portal. Other than Elusia's insistence on Duque's order, which forbade the master craftsman Jurban from installing laboratories in the stronghold, the dwarves and gnomes had installed all the crazy things in it. In the end, within a month, Naxxramas had become such a ferocious existence, 2,000 cannons of various calibers, the target was more than 5,000. There were already 36 wizard towers, 108 under construction, the final target was 256. Among them, there were 36 wizard towers for Radiant Moon mages to oversee, and 3 for Breaking Dawn mages. Even if there were only 2,000 cannons, there were only 500 on each of the 4 sides. Its power was definitely at a level that could destroy heaven and earth. Fire the cannons, fire the cannons. Bulang was inexplicably excited. Unlike his 2 elder brothers, although he could also use God's descent, it was not strong. Bulang's talent was basically focused on long-range weapons. After careful study, he even proposed the idea of transforming Naxxramas into a multifaceted fortress. This way, no matter which direction the enemy attacked the stronghold from, they would receive a more three-dimensional counterattack. Now, under the bombardment of the cannons, tons of Karaji bugmen were blown into the sky and turned into dregs. They fell to the ground like heavy rain, forming a thick mountain of bug corpses. Bulang frowned and gave the second order: all mortars will drop incendiary bombs. A few minutes later, the entire wall of beetles had turned into a fiery purgatory. Fortunately, the direction of the wind was from north to south. Otherwise, the burnt smell of the insect carcasses would definitely make people unable to eat any meat for a few days. After half a day of bombardment, it seemed that the Kila insect troops also knew that they were no match for the Allied forces in the wilderness, and a large number of insects retreated. Advance! Bulang ordered. But soon, a warning came from the fortress control system. DD. Warning. Warning. There is an unknown gravitational field ahead. Naxxramas is in danger of crashing again if forced to advance. Apart from Duque, no one understood how this system warning came about. They could only speculate that Thun seemed to be up to something. Big brother, do we force an attack? Bulang asked. Magni slapped his third brother's horned helmet. Idiot. See, Thun is an ancient god after all. The Alliance worked so hard to get a floating fortress, it would be terrible if it fell. Next time, see if those magicians would let the Dalajan take the lead. Yes, yes, yes. It was not easy to get such a powerful flying fortress. If it really fell, the Alliance's advantage would be greatly weakened. After spending a whole day, the Alliance used steam tanks and cranes to clear the passage behind the wall of beetles. There were two huge areas in front of the Allied forces. The east side was the area that had been hit by Naxxramas, and was temporarily called the Kiraj Ruins. There were a lot of powerful creatures detected there. The west side was the main building of the Kiraj Temple. I suggest we split into two groups. Otherwise, if we all attack one group, it will only make the other group attack from the back, Sal said. Magni and the other leaders of the Alliance fell silent. It was true that the Alliance and the Horde had formed an alliance. However, in the absence of Duke, both Magni and William did not have enough power and prestige to suppress Thrall and hold absolute command in the Alliance, even though both sides had tried their best to cooperate sincerely. After thinking for a while, Magni and William looked at each other and understood each other's thoughts. A melon that was forcefully twisted would not be sweet. Then I'll have to trouble the Horde to attack the Kiraj Ruins. Magni turned and said, Your Majesty Jaina. Yes. Jaina responded, then walked in front of Sal and handed him a 30-page document. This is the information that Commander Duke Marcus came up with after consulting a lot of historical materials about the War of the Shifting Sands and asking the Dragon and Night Elf commanders who participated in the war. Sal, Woken, and Grom's pupils instantly shrank. They were old friends. Even if they had different standpoints, Duke's information was rarely wrong when it came to the Allied forces facing a strong enemy. General Lajax. Scar the Scarless Audrian. Thank Duke for me. Sal nodded heavily. Please note that the records in the historical materials are not complete. These are only the parts that are recorded. For the rest, please adapt to the situation, Jaina emphasized. Of course, she knew that Duque should have detailed information about the color of the fur on the enemy leaders but the Alliance was not obliged to provide it to the Horde. If it was the Horde in the past, Duque might have given more detailed information to preserve the strength of the Allied forces. But now, the gazes of the three Windwalker sisters were like arrows, shooting towards Sal's back with shio shio shio. Similarly, the Alliance's priests and paladins also looked over there with ugly expressions. If it weren't for the Kiraj insect people and Sea Thun, who were even more terrifying enemies, they might have been completely defeated. Sal was a little embarrassed, but he didn't regret it. From the day he recruited the Forsaken into the Horde's camp, he had foreseen this scene. The former Great Chief Orgrim and the other chiefs, plus the former Sun King Anastrian and the Silver Moon Council had all become Death Knights and Liches. It would be strange if the Alliance gave them a good attitude. That was why Sar had suggested splitting the army, and why Magni had agreed. Without Duque or Anduin Lothar, who had defeated the Horde, they really couldn't control the situation. Chapter 1309. The Alliance and the Horde split up. Thrall wasn't careless. Other than pulling the Horde's main force, he also borrowed half a division of steam tanks. Thrall simply asked for cover fire. The Alliance didn't dare to let Naxxramas go up, but it was still possible to get a tank division and 2 flying battleships. The Skybreaker was left behind, and the Flying Dutchman and Black Pearl came up. It turned out that the Allied forces were a little oversensitive. They seemed to have realized that areas outside the protection of Sea Thun's divine power were no match for the Alliance's artillery. The Kiraj Bugmen had no intention of fighting the Alliance outside. The Alliance drove all the way to the main hall of the Kiraj Temple. The moment they stepped through the door, countless Alliance soldiers felt dizzy and vomited. This is Sea Thun's evil aura. Tyron didn't look too good either. She felt that the power of the moon goddess Elun was being rejected. It wasn't that it couldn't be used at all, but if they wanted to use it, they would have to pay a higher price. Everyone below the level of a hero, leave. William waved his hand and ordered decisively. There weren't many mortals who entered. With the help of the stronger ones, they barely managed to complete the evacuation. This isn't good. If only the hero squad can enter, it'll be troublesome if we get surrounded. Magni took off his helmet, scratched his head, and put it back on. Jaina was the most careful. She pointed at the stairs. Look carefully. There aren't many traces of insects stepping on the stairs. If I'm not wrong, those with insufficient status aren't allowed to enter the main hall. If a large number of insects' sharp legs had pierced through the stairs countless times, no matter how hard it would be full of holes. It seemed that humans were divided into different levels, and so were insects. Along the way, it wasn't just ordinary insects that attacked them, but powerful monsters. The 10-story tall monster, the Anubisath Defender, looked like a typical Egyptian dog-headed giant. Not only did it leave a deep impression with its heavy punches, it would also self-destruct after dying. If not for Duque's strategy, people would have died in minutes. The Obsidian Cleanser, which looked a little like a sphinx and had a purplish-black body, could release disgusting energy shockwaves and mindlessly blow people up. When the Alliance's hero squad slowly advanced in front of the Prophet Skirum, everyone carefully looked through the strategy left behind by Duque. They needed a total of 3 warriors. There weren't many warriors who had stepped into the realm of heroes these days. When Anduin Lothar was still around, all he could see were warriors. Ever since there were paladins who could fight, tank, and heal, most of the Alliance's melee classes went to become paladins. Back then, the 5 Silver Saints were all warriors. When asked if Gavin Rad and the others could turn back, he said that he was used to it and that it was not good to turn back. He had no choice but to let Bulang Bronzebeard run back to make a cameo. Bulang put down his beloved shotgun, picked up his axe and shield, and used charge. He looked pretty decent. Just like that, the eldest and third brother of the Bronzebeard family, as well as William, barely made up 3 warrior tanks to tank the boss. As the number 1 in the Kiraj Divine Temple, Prophet Skirum's fighting style wasn't too disgusting. Anyone who could beat Majordomo in the Molten Core should be able to deal with him. In theory, this boss with a lower body like a spider, upper body like a steamed lobster, and a cockroach hanging on its chest shouldn't be difficult to deal with. The problem was that the leader of the Kiraj Divine Temple wasn't stupid. If he were to stand guard one by one, wouldn't he be waiting for the boss to come and kill him? It was as if he had poked a hornet's nest. Almost as soon as Magni rushed up to fight Skirum, an evil energy wave suddenly spread out from the ground. The range of this wave was so wide that it almost covered an area the size of at least 10 football fields in front of and behind the main gate of the temple. Without any warning, the ground within this area collapsed. The majestic main hall of the Kiraj Divine Temple, along with the huge dome that was the size of a battleship, the thick stone pillars that required 5 people to wrap their arms around, and the exquisite and beautiful hard floor tiles all collapsed. This was so big that it left all the Alliance powerhouses speechless. None of the Alliance powerhouses knew how to fly. As the debris fell like rain, everyone screamed and fell. Watch my pseudo-levitation spell. Gavin Rad reacted immediately. He waved his wind sword, and the strong wind from the divine artifact sword blew under everyone's feet. It slightly supported everyone and slowed down their falling speed. In theory, they wouldn't die from the fall, but a new problem arose. Everyone's falling speed slowed down, but the huge rocks above them were still falling at the same speed. For everyone who couldn't dodge in midair, this meant heavy casualties. Attack! The Windrunner sisters were the first to react. The 3 sisters suddenly twisted their bodies and changed their posture to be upside down so that it was easier to shoot with their bows. The arrows mixed with the power of wind and lightning rushed up and smashed the rocks above them. While the Windrunner sisters were covering them, everyone else started to summon their flying mounts, pure-blood fire eagles. Bright flames flew out of everyone's hands and turned into a huge fire eagle in the blink of an eye. Only when the Firehawks carried the heroes did the situation change a little. There's something down there. Sasha's eyes were the sharpest. Half a second later, she shouted, "Enemy! It's a family of 3 and the leader of the sludge." A family of 3 was the abbreviation of Lord Carey, Princess Yaj, and Vim. They were the leaders of the 3 gigantic insects of different sizes and colors. The leader that looked like a sludge monster was the aberration monster, Vistus. "Don't go down, it's a trap." William was the first to react. Don't act according to the enemy's plan. This was the instinct of a commander. Just as everyone was about to fly up on their pure-blood fire eagles, an ear-piercing buzzing sound came from afar. Everyone was familiar with this sound. It was the buzzing sound of bees flying. The problem was, where did such a huge bee come from? The first to rush out of the darkness and enter the vision of the Alliance powerhouses was a huge green insect. There were many red spots on her wings. Princess Huhuran. Aurelia turned pale with fright. Most of the people were suspended in midair. Aerial battles weren't something that mortals were good at. Even if everyone had a pure-blood fire eagle to carry them, it still wouldn't work. No one believed that a pure-blood fire eagle that was only slightly stronger than a griffin would be a match for a flying insect like Princess Huhuran. Oh. Do I have to do it after all? There was only one person who didn't summon a pure-blood fire eagle despite being supported by Gavinrad's Gale, Countess Katrana. In fact, even if she was left alone, she wouldn't fall to her death. This was because she was the famous Black Dragon Princess, Onyxia. Chapter 13:10. Onyxia let out a long howl, and a pair of black wings grew out of her bare back. Her 4 limbs turned into sharp claws in the blink of an eye, and her smooth and tender skin was instantly covered with dense and solid scales. Her reddish-black robe instantly turned into rags, revealing her colossal dragon body. A meteor hammer-like tail also grew out of her buttocks. In just a breath's time, she had already completely taken on the form of a colossal dragon. Under the surprised gazes of the Alliance heroes, this colossal black dragon was rapidly growing in size and fearlessly charging forward. "Well done!" Varian exclaimed happily. Originally, William did not have a good impression of Onyxia, the evil black dragon who had caused him so much trouble last year, caused him to split into 2, and even almost gave up the right to rule Stormwind City. If the person who claimed to have subdued her wasn't Duke Marcus, whom he respected, he would have immediately turned hostile and forced the other party to execute this black dragon. Evil must be eradicated. His ghost wolf personality drove him to do so. But now, everyone, including William, was extremely glad that the Alliance had Onyxia, a powerful colossal dragon who didn't belong to the Dragon Slumber Shrine, to help them. Without her, the Alliance heroes would probably be beaten up. "Let's fly up." "We can't let Magni be up there alone," William shouted. Under his command, the powerhouses all controlled the fire eagles to dodge the falling rocks and fly up. Woo! At this moment, another existence rushed out of the darkness at high speed. From afar, it looked like a little elf soaring among the flowers. She had the appearance of a human and 2 pairs of transparent cicada wings. She was covered with a white veil and wore a low-cut evening gown that bound her breasts. Didn't she look very beautiful? Apart from the 2 horn-like giant bugs on her shoulders, the green claws that were curled up, and the pair of feet, claws, that only had 3 fingers. If that was the case, she was indeed a beauty. The problem was that everyone in the Alliance knew that she was the leader of Kiraj, Sartura. She used a brainless whirlwind slash right from the start. The formless wind blades easily covered the entire upper floor. She did not participate in the battle between Black Dragon and Princess Huhuran at all. She even took the initiative to avoid the battle. Knowing that the wind blades of Whirlwind Slash would not be able to hit the pure-blooded Firehawk in the distance, she only did one thing: block the entire airspace, forbidding the Alliance from flying up. Not only her, but more Kiraj insect people flew over. They took the risk of being killed by falling rocks and sealed off the entire airspace. William's facial muscles kept twitching as he looked at the sealed airspace again. Finally, he squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. "Let's go down. Don't separate." "That's right." He had no choice but to go down. Be it Magni or Onyxia, they were both people who could hold on for a long time on their own. He could only wish them luck. After he made up his mind, the things he had to do became much clearer. At first glance, this was a huge cave with a depth of more than a kilometer. In the vast dark space, there were plenty of places for the flying insects to soar and attack back and forth. Outside, they could have the support of the Alliance's cannons. However, in this cave, there were leader-level insects on the ground, and they had to be wary of the enemies that swooped down from time to time. Needless to say, annihilation was the only outcome. "We have to find cover," William shouted. "There!" Queen Sylvanas raised her hand, and a lightning arrow shot over. Along with the lightning, everyone saw that it was a huge hole in midair. The hole was about 2 stories high, and could allow 4 carriages to pass through side by side. However, for the current situation where there were enemies all around, it was already the best place to hide. No matter how bad it was better than directly falling into the mouths of a family of 3. It was at this moment that Sartura swooped down. As she swept past, she activated a powerful whirlwind slash. The violent wind blades easily scattered the Alliance's flying formation. Brawl Bearhide's Firehawk couldn't dodge in time, and was killed by the whirlwind slash on the spot. If he hadn't instantly transformed into a giant bear with thick skin and flesh, he would probably have died as well. "Grab my hand." As the other main force of King was Iron Triangle, Valera barely managed to save Brawl. "No! We have to do something!" William shouted. "Duque, help!" Jaina couldn't help but shout in the weave. If possible, Duque wanted to spend more time perfecting his weave. He had never thought that his weave would have to undergo a test so soon. Spellcasters who were connected to the weave could contact it, but most of their requests would be ignored. Duque wasn't a super operator with 1,000 brains. In order to maintain the newborn weave, his system elves were almost operating at full capacity. However, this voice couldn't be ignored by Duque, because the one calling him was Jaina. "Duque, I need your magical support, the kind that can instantly annihilate thousands of flying insects." "All right." Duque's direct reply in the weave made Jaina overjoyed. Communication through divine will was the most direct. In just half a second, Duque understood the whole story. "Damn it! Mere insects, do you think you're an eel? You even dare to touch my girl?" The entire weave was responding to its owner's anger. Apart from the flapping of the flying insect's wings, there shouldn't be too many other sounds in the void. Suddenly, it was as if the darkness would split open at any time and a sun would jump out. The rocks and sand around the fire eagle that should have been falling at a higher speed seemed to have broken free from the restraints of gravity and sputtered horizontally. A terrifying aura with great majesty rose from behind Jaina and Alucia, and the insects that were flying in the air started to cry out strangely. They screamed, wanting to get close to the 2 female spellcasters and get rid of them first. However, a formless elemental wave swept across the void. It was as if there was a pair of gigantic air palms above and below that suddenly pressed down on all the insects, causing them to hover in the air. They couldn't move up nor down, nor could they advance nor retreat. They were stuck there awkwardly, becoming pitiful live targets. In the next instant, the darkness around the 2 female spellcasters suddenly parted, and a dazzling white light lit up the entire dark cave like the first snowfall of winter. Reflected in everyone's eyes were countless rays of pure white light piercing through the vast darkness of the void. It was as if the heavenly river was flowing in reverse, attacking from below towards the sky. Blizzard? No. This was more than 1,000 top-notch, frost arrows. In theory, this would require at least 1,000 radiant moon archmages at the same time, each casting for 2.5 seconds. However, with the support of the weave, Jaina and Alucia easily achieved this. The blooming flower of ice was like a blooming white chrysanthemum. Chapter 13:11. In midair, apart from Sartura and Princess Huhuran, who was fighting fiercely at a higher altitude, every single Kiraj flying insect was completely torn into pieces after a sharp wind-breaking sound. Their long shins, sharp claws, and sharp mouthparts were all broken and scattered in the air. In less than half a second, they would turn into ice and fall to the ground along with the mud falling from the sky. In an instant, it was as if the entire world had become quiet. Not to mention Sartura, even Princess Huhuran and her family of 3 were shocked. Inside the Karazhan, Duke spat on the ground. Tisk. The magic net was built with the main cities of the Alliance and Horde as the core nodes. In the Kiraj temple, Thun had used some mysterious power to resist the magic net's coverage. The wave of Jaina's power just now was also the last wave. Right before the magic net was forcefully cut off, Duque sent a message to Jaina. Hold on, I have to save Magni first. In reality, before the magic net was completed, Duque's advancement had already been completed. He had wanted to spend more time to build a better foundation. Unfortunately, the Allied forces would not stop advancing to wait for him. Previously, Tyrant had purposely slowed down the progress at the cost of human lives. Sometimes, it was like this. When the situation was pressing, only those who could grow faster under the pressure would be able to carve out a bloody path in the face of adversity. Khadgar. I'll go to Kiraj. I'll leave the magic net to you for now, Duque instructed. Master, the problem is that there are more and more requests to connect. Khadgar frowned. Then inform the spellcasters who have used the magic net many times. Now that the magic net is newly built, overuse may cause a heavy burden on the spellcaster's mind and soul. Limit the number of times they can use the magic net in the first month, Duque said grandly. Khadgar bared his teeth. Although adding a usage limit was definitely a considerate measure for new spellcasters, how many people could see through the dilemma of not having enough mana in the magic net? Furthermore, if Duque were to go personally, it would probably be a huge mana overdraft. Alright. If the boss moved his lips, the lackeys would naturally have to run their legs. Khadgar and the other elemental emissaries looked at each other and saw the bitter smiles in each other's eyes. You don't need to say anything, just get to work. Duque waved, Atish, and a purplish-blue long and narrow teleportation door appeared in front of him. The meticulous Khadgar noticed that this portal was narrower than usual, giving off a sharper feeling. His eyes were not playing tricks on him. This was a portal used to break through space. Beyond, Kiraj Divine Temple was Thun's territory. As an ancient god, of course, he wouldn't let his enemies come and go as they pleased. You want to open a portal to enter? No way. It was supposed to be like this. However, the space attribute of the drumstick wasn't just for show. With the unpleasant cawing of the 3 ghost crows, Duque's spirit began to cross the void and came to the outside of the temple of Kiraj. Ha! What a small flaw. Originally, the Kiraj Divine Temple was a solid piece of land. No one would be able to open a portal to enter. Ever since the honest and reliable Duque forcefully smashed Naxxramas in and turned the large area of the Divine Temple into the ruins of Kiraj, a flaw had appeared in Thun's spatial defense. Even though Thun had patched up the flaw later on, it could still be considered a flaw. This was a flaw that even a normal Breaking Dawn Archmage couldn't exploit, but Duque had immediately grasped it. Duque stretched out his right hand. At the same time, outside the spatial defense layer thousands of miles away, an identical but larger arcane energy palm appeared and tore open the hole in the spatial defense layer with one hand. Without giving Thun any time to react, Duque's main body directly stepped into the portal and teleported over at high speed. On the other side, the bitter Magni was being abused. The area that he was in had already collapsed, but the problem was that before he fell, Prophet Skirim had used its 2 claws hidden under its rose-red sleeves to grab him and teleported him deeper into the Divine Temple. Initially, the battle was still going well. Relying on the advantage of the Balrog's hammer, Magni relied on the god's descent state and used his enlarged body to solo Prophet Skirim. Needless to say, when Magni really took out a quarter of this lobster-shaped monster boss HP, a nightmare came. Every time Skirum lost a quarter of its HP, it would create 2 doppelgangers. As long as there was no one next to the main body or the doppelganger, it would mindlessly throw spells. Things like Great Earthquake Strike, Magic Explosion, Frost Trap, and all sorts of other random spells. According to normal tactics, the 3 main tanks would pull the main body and the doppelganger, and everyone would concentrate their firepower to kill the doppelganger first. This was because the doppelganger's attack power was even higher than the main body. But now that Magni was the only one left, he immediately felt bitter. The boss had doppelgangers, and they were running all over the street. He had wanted to catch one and kill it first, but in the end, it could teleport, and not to a fixed location. If it caught up, it would teleport away, and Magni was fooled. There were a few times when Magni wanted to leave and find a hole, or even dig a hole himself and fall in. But he found that the ground was extremely solid, and he was at least 1,000 meters away from the main door of the temple. He could only miserably run around with Skirum, and be kited by him again and again. He knew that when the duration of his god's descent ended, it would be time for him to die in battle. Just at this moment, a mysterious purplish-blue light suddenly appeared beside Magni. That dazzling light was like the light of the birth of all things. Perhaps the life on Earth came from sunlight, and it was incompatible with the purplish-blue color. But this ball of light gave people a feeling that it was full of wisdom. At that moment, in the originally decaying temple, all the other colors dimmed. It was as if there was no other color in the world. The space suddenly trembled. A crack in space that wasn't very wide was forcefully torn open, and became a slightly narrow teleportation door. A man in a blue and white magic robe walked out. Magni almost threw himself at him with tears and snot. Duke's eyelids twitched. Why did this Duke sound like it was calling him, but why did it feel like Magni was calling him father? Bullsh *T. I don't have such an ugly son. Duke kicked Magni, who had rushed over to hug Magni's leg after he had dispelled God's descent. Scram! When there were comrades standing behind him that needed his protection, Magni was the most reliable warrior. He fully demonstrated what it meant by heaven to the left, and warriors to the right, with his ridiculously hard body. However, in the face of a demigod like Duke, Mag actually cowered in fear. Chapter 13:12. Terrified. Yes. He was King coward. Perhaps he was trying to conserve his energy, or perhaps he felt that he had to leave a useful body for the next battle. This burly dwarf took out a tower shield from his storage bag and carried it on his back. He changed his axe to a shield in his left hand and a hammer in his right. From afar, he looked like a tortoise if he didn't have the Balrog hammer. Duke rolled his eyes and decided not to bother with this guy anymore. He spread out his spirit sense and sensed that although Jaina and the others were in a sorry state, they were fine. Duke exhaled a breath of turbid air. Phew, all right. Although I don't know who taught you to divide and annihilate, but since you're so good at it, I can't hold back. Let's deal with you quickly and meet up with the others. Suddenly, Skirum replied to Duke, long live Thun, Duke, huh? This guy could talk. He didn't have much of an impression after fighting so many times. After all, this guy wasn't strong and hadn't been wiped out many times. But, your boss Thun is already more than 10,000 years old. Are you sure you want to wish him long live? Duke laughed shamelessly and made his move. Prophet Skirum was faster than Duke. He instinctively sensed that the elemental state around Duque wasn't right, so he didn't choose to use Magic Burst. Instead, he let his main body and doppelganger release Great Earthquake Strike at the same time. Duque frowned. Skirum had obviously held back just now. When that shocking force of nature hit him, he instinctively realized that if he was in his normal state, he would definitely be sent flying by this force. No, being sent flying was already a good thing. The worst thing was to be hit by 3 great earthquake strikes at the same time. That scene would probably be like a pile driver. he would become a pillar and be driven deep into the ground. Mag was about to remind Duque to be careful. However, he saw that Duque did not make any extra movements. He just pressed one hand into the void, and suddenly, a faint sound of wind whistling and thunder rumbling rang out. He didn't make any big movements. It was as if he was flipping a page in a book. It was very natural. In that instant, it was as if Duque's hand had grasped the power of the entire world. It was as if the entire cycle of life and death was within his grasp. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The natural elemental shockwave that should have punched a few large holes in Duque's seemingly thin body instantly disintegrated and dissipated with this action of Duque's. No! Prophet Skirum shouted. In the blink of an eye. The radiance of the arcane technique lit up, and 3 identical Skirums appeared beside Duque in a triangular formation, firmly surrounding him. The 3 Skirums, whose upper bodies resembled lobsters, had fanatical expressions on their faces as they raised their claws in unison and shouted, "Go to hell." The purple radiance of magic burst immediately lit up on the main body and the 2 doppelgangers. Pfft! Duque laughed shamelessly. Sure enough, monsters are monsters. Or is it that those who aren't in human form have lower intelligence? Bang! Bang! The arcane energy explosion that enveloped Skirum's body suddenly stopped. The purplish-blue radiance on the 3 guys' bodies all rushed out uncontrollably and condensed into hundreds of arcane missiles in midair. In an instant, they shot back at their own bodies. Then, Mag heard, bang. Bang! 2 shattering sounds rang out, and the 2 boss doppelgangers that had been bothering him for a long time exploded. Impossible! Skirum shouted. Impossible? Duque smiled. Idiot! Let me tell you. If I can't enter the divine domain as the god of magic, then I will settle for the next best thing, and become a god as the god of arcane magic. After teasing for a while, Duque didn't waste any more words and directly pointed at the index and middle fingers of his right hand. Chirp, a sound rang out. Duque's fingers seemed to extend infinitely. Of course, it wasn't that Duque's fingers became longer, but the arcane energy instantly shot out from his fingertips. It was hard to describe whether it was an arcane missile or an arcane sword. The arcane elemental light that shot out was incredibly fast, and in less than 1/100th of a second, it pierced Skirum's throat. It was clearly magic, but it was no less cold than any divine sword in the world. This was both magic and a long sword condensed from magic. The sword light was full of killing intent, and the momentum of the sword could pierce through any hard shell that wasn't protected by divinity. Clang! At the moment when Duque's long arcane sword pierced Skirum's throat, Skirum, who was a general under Thun, finally reacted at the critical moment. The huge red pauldrons, no, it should be a part of its body, the hard shell on the left and right shoulders, suddenly closed. The solid shell locked the incoming sword edge, so that the long arcane sword couldn't move an inch. Huh! Duque's 2 fingers bent slightly, and then poked out again. Obviously, Duque didn't reveal any emotion, but Magni, who was next to him, had a completely different feeling. He seemed to hear the sound of a sword resounding through the world, and a terrifying killing intent surged. The pure arcane energy burst out like a flood. Duque's calmness formed a sharp contrast with Skirum's and Magni's nervousness. Clang! The long sword that seemed to have been locked a moment ago became 2 sharper arcane daggers in the next instant. This time, the hard shell couldn't stop it anymore, and the 2 more agile energy daggers pierced through with unparalleled force. There was no time to dodge, let alone block. There was only a "pu" sound, and the 2 daggers pierced Skirum's throat in an instant. There were no more 50% and 25% clones left. The arcane energy that rushed into Prophet Skirum's body destroyed it like lightning, and sucked away all of its life force in one breath. Skirum's huge body, which weighed several tons, collapsed with a loud bang. Magni was dumbfounded. Duque. That's it? Duque's eyes rolled back. How long do you want to fight? I'm a demigod now after all. To deal with a leader-level creature that doesn't even have divinity, do I have to fight for a day and a night before I barely win? Ah. Are all demigods so awesome? Alright. I'll become a demigod too. Duque ruthlessly attacked Magni. Let's wait until you become a legendary hero first. Legendary heroes weren't a real level. It was purely to distinguish the powerhouses who had stepped into the realm of heroes from the powerhouses who were infinitely close to the realm of demigods. It was a level that adventurers boasted about themselves. Chapter 13:13. But the rank of legendary heroes seemed to be solidifying recently. It couldn't be helped. According to the realm of heroes, the newly promoted Valilla, Brawl, and the earlier batch of Riadaline and Lillis were all heroes. But the difference in strength between them and the oldest batch of heroes was too great. Not to mention Tyrion Fordring, the most senior Empress Dowager, even Vanessa could easily defeat Valera. After all, Vanessa's strength was honed through countless bloody battles. Compared to Valera, who could only bully mortal gladiators in the arena or beat up small monsters, it was a completely different concept. If Vanessa hadn't been so busy recently, Valilla would have chased after Vanessa every day to ask for a duel. The same thing happened to Riadaline. She was already the most powerful paladin among the Blood Elves. Even without divine equipment, Gavin Rad still relied on the more intense holy light to take down Riadaline with one hand. And in the tavern, in the comments of the upper echelons, heroes who had experienced so many battles were unknowingly promoted to the new rank of legendary heroes. Naturally, there was a new standard for legendary heroes. Only those who could take down a divine creature alone could be considered a legendary hero. Hearing Duque's words, Magni bared his teeth. Good, good, good. There are too many things to do now. The Iron Furnace Castle needs a powerful guardian. I'll go train after defeating Si Thun. Duque stretched out his hand. He had wanted to take Prophet Skirim's spoils of war and leave, but the system elf suddenly gave him a notification. The soul of this creature has been detected to be compatible with the magic net. Would you like to capture it? If captured, there is a 94% chance that it can be converted into a magic net processor after purification. Huh? What kind of benefit is this? Looking at the system notification carefully, Duque decisively clicked, yes. He only saw Duque's right hand pinch the air, and then a translucent spirit of Skirim was pulled out of the body by Duque. Nimble fingers flew in the air, and then Skirim's soul was shredded like a butcher dismembering an ox. The extra spider legs, shoulder armor, and arms were all cut off and shattered in the void, leaving only a purple-blue soul core, which was finally taken by Duque's palm. The corners of Duque's mouth rose, and he suddenly smiled bitterly. Because he found that what he was doing now was almost the same as what Jaden had done to Zul back then. However, the egg always destroyed Zul's body and stuffed it into an ice skeleton. Duque was a bit more thorough. He completely erased Skirim's soul imprint, which meant that the miserable Skirim would no longer have any memories and would only be left with the instincts of a caster. Duque had received a system notification the moment he'd brought Cram to the Weave. Arcane Soul Compatibility Test complete. The Weave has obtained a new metamagic ability, Enhanced Magic Blast. This ability can increase the critical hit rate of Magic Blast by 10%. Holy sh*T. There's actually such a suffocating operation. Come to think of it, it made sense. Skirim had always used teleportation and magic blast to blast his enemies until they wished they were dead. It wasn't surprising that his soul had the ability to enhance magic blast. Originally, Duque had no interest in small bosses other than Si Thun, but now it was completely different. This was a great opportunity to collect metamagic abilities. Ever since he'd opened the Weave, Duque had suffered enough. There was no other reason, it was because he didn't earn much. It was different from what he'd imagined. Simply saving mana would not bring more benefits to Duque, but providing metamagic abilities, which were more profitable value-added services, would allow Duque to fill his pockets. At this moment, Duque felt that his hobby of collecting had awakened. In the underground cave thousands of meters away, Jaina and Alucia's sudden outburst had only slightly improved the situation of the hero group. Without the entanglement of the small monsters, the hero group faced the fierce attack of Sartura again. After the weave was forcefully expelled by Thun's power, the hero group had lost a more effective way to fight back. Under the attacks of Sartura, who charged at them like a brainless whirlwind, the team members were forced to split into two groups. One group successfully charged into the hole in mid-air, while the other group had to land on the ground to face the family of three. The family of three and Sartura's combination was indeed terrifying, but it wasn't much better for them to charge into the hole, because there was another boss guarding the hole. It was the fourth boss of Kiraj, the tenacious Fancaris. It had 6 legs and a trident tail. It had bright yellow skin and red stripes, and it was a commander-tier monster with the body of a scorpion. Fancaris's fighting style was quite irritating. It would constantly summon small insects and even elite sandworms to cause trouble. And it had a strong attack that could tear apart the highest-level epic armor of this era. The most disgusting thing was its teleportation. It would occasionally teleport a team member into its nest, and they couldn't do anything but take the beating of the small insects without struggling. Of course, Fancaris's problem was child's play compared to the danger below. It wasn't just the family of three. Even the leader of the ooze monsters, Vistus, had come out. This meant that the team below had to endure the crazy attacks of 5 bosses at the same time. It was obvious that there was a commander behind the scenes directing these leaders to perfectly divide and eliminate the Alliance heroes. Damn it. Gugugugu. Gavin Rad was the first to suffer. When he was the first to land on his fire eagle, he was also the first to be ambushed. The leader of the ooze monsters, Vistus, suddenly jumped out from under the sand and swallowed Gavin Rad along with his fire eagle. Gavin Rad activated his invincibility almost immediately. So what? The Paladin's Holy Shield spell only lasted for slightly more than 10 seconds. Once the time was up, Gavin Rad felt like he was drowning in the corrosive mucus. If it wasn't for the fact that his entire body was filled with holy light, and the wind sword's nature attribute slightly resisted the corrosive mucus, Gavin Rad would probably have been the first to die in this battle. The scales of victory for the Alliance were still tipping in the direction of collapse. William led his men into the cave and faced Fancaris head-on. Magni stayed on the surface, and only Bulang and Theon were left to tank the boss. Due to the need of battle tactics, Riataline had come down wearing an armor that strengthened the Holy Light spell, and she couldn't change it in time. Be careful. Before Theon could finish his sentence, Sartura had already swooped down for the kill. The claws on her 2 legs stretched out. Since she didn't manage to hook the more agile Queen Sylvia, she flapped her wings and suddenly changed her target, grabbing Kalia who was beside her. She wanted to tear Kalia in half in midair. Just then, a teleportation door appeared out of nowhere in the air behind her.